I think we're ready to convene the meeting. I know some others may arrive later, which is just fine, but it's 3 o'clock, and today is December the 19th, if I've got that straight, and it's 3 p.m., and this is a meeting of the City of Topeka City Council's Policy and Finance Committee. Our subject in particular today is to talk about residency requirements, and so we welcome the guests that are here and those that continue to arrive. Let's first, so I'm calling the meeting to order. If the committee members would introduce themselves.
I'm Jeff Cohen, District 8.
And Tony Emerson, representing District 4.
And I'm Karen Hiller, and I represent District 1. Would the staff that are here supporting introduce as well?
Sure. Brent Trout, City Manager.
Catherine Walters, Senior Assistant City Attorney.
Jackie Russell, Human Resources Director.
And Liz Toyne is in the back. She's our council staff and has done a fair amount of prep work for this as well. Thank you all. Without any further ado, we as a committee need to approve the minutes from our November 18th meeting, or November 2018.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion, corrections, additions? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Nobody left. Minutes are approved, Liz. And we will head right into our discussion on employee residency requirement. Just to frame it for those who are watching elsewhere, currently our requirement for our employees in the city of Topeka is that they live somewhere in Shawnee County. There is a history of having been required to live in the city that has slowly over time changed. And within that requirement, without quoting it word for word, there are some time response requirements for some employees. So with that, I will defer to staff updates. We had out of that November meeting a variety of assignments. I have some things that Liz got for us, but I'll defer to you three first.
Yeah, you go ahead. Start.
So from the follow-up items that we had, one of the things was the number of days that positions, critical positions had been open. And so in looking back, the longest position that we've had open has been open for 571 days. And that's an engineering position, asset management. So that is a more challenging position to fill, followed by another engineering position, stormwater engineer, and that position has been open for 549 days. We have an electrician position that has been open for 144 days. Water system general manager, which is filled now, but it was open for 196 days. And it was filled with an incumbent that resided in Shawnee County. A plan reviewer position was open for 237 days, and we were able to hire that position with someone that came from Missouri.
If I can ask, was that the plan reviewer position in the fire department?
In planning.
In planning, okay.
Well, the fire plan reviewer position is also in planning.
I knew that. That's why I asked.
Okay.
Because it was a new position, and I didn't know if it had been someplace else unfilled as that discussion.
No, this was a prior vacancy.
Okay.
We have a management analyst position that was vacant for 123 days, and it was filled with a new hire from Edgerton, Missouri. Probation office supervisor position that was vacant for 118 days, filled with an incumbent from Hutchinson, Kansas. Construction inspection manager position was vacant for 110 days, and we ended up filling that internally with an internal promotion.
Could you help me with what an incumbent is then if they're not from here?
They were already a city employee and they were internally promoted. I'm not saying that they weren't from here. I thought that what you had asked is for positions that had been held open for a long period of time.
No, it's fine. I just didn't, you said incumbent, and then you said filled by a current employee, and I thought, oh, there must be a difference then. So I'm just trying to catch terms.
I just meant city incumbent, I
Okay,
apologize.
thank you.
The traffic engineer position was vacant for 111 days, and we ultimately filled that with a current Shawnee County resident. The neighborhood planner position was vacant for 107 days, and we filled it with someone that came from Colorado. We have a management analyst position that was vacant for 101 days, and we were able to fill that with a current Shawnee County resident. Another management analyst position was vacant for 88 days, and we filled that with someone that came from Olathe, Kansas.
That's
Yes.
a good question. Thank you. Chairwoman, what is a management analyst?
A management analyst is someone that works at the department level or in central accounting, and they analyze data analytics for the departments and provide reporting and analyze processes and numbers and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
If I,
Yep.
a lot of times they're public administration type folks that go to school to maybe get into city administration. This is a beginning opening position for them.
But we had 3 of them that were open.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, I guess.
Similar.
Yes, and I guess our time frame was we went back to 2016, and so that's covering a 2-year span. And some of the ones, if the earlier ones that I mentioned are still not filled.
Gotcha. Continue, thank you.
Okay, and then we have an asset management analyst, another management analyst position. It was open for 82 days, and we were able to fill that position with someone from Olathe. All of the positions that I've mentioned up until this point have been management level positions that do require some experience and college education. These positions now that I'm going to talk about are more entry-level positions. So an equipment operator position in traffic operations was open for, it's still open, I guess, for 49 days. And we've had one qualified applicant that was not willing to relocate to Shawnee County. And the other position is a utility system worker 2 position in our utilities department at our water plant. And that position's been open for 46 days, and there's 3 applicants that have expressed not being willing to relocate to Shawnee County. And so we stopped at the 45-ish day mark because anything below that is really kind of a typical time frame for recruitment.
Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
So when those last 2 or 3 that declined because they didn't want to relocate, do you have any idea where they were from? Are they just from little communities around
From
here?
smaller communities in surrounding counties. Jackson County, Douglas County are the primary ones.
Okay.
Thanks, that's helpful. I was thinking, I was going to ask you the question and you answered it first, because it's not uncommon for 60 days or so to pass in a routine turnover, is it? Right?
It's not uncommon, and I just mentioned those because it's not been typical that we see that in our entry-level positions, and so that's why I thought it was of note to bring up.
Sure, and we're not always at full employment either.
No, we're not. It's changes day by day.
And if I could ask, we have also been on we've built a pretty substantial vacancy credit into the budget. So if you could just address whether the ideal of holding a position vacant for a while if the right candidate hadn't come along was perhaps anything to do with the holding open of some of these longer, particularly the real long ones?
That's not been a factor.
Okay.
We generally are trying to hold for about 2 pay periods and make sure that there's no overlap with the final payout and filling of a position. So about 30 days is the target.
I'm looking at our audience. Does this include police and fire positions?
Police and fire entry level are, they run academies, and so we
Right.
have 2 academies a year, and so the entry level positions wait for one of those 2 scheduled academies in each department. Contractually, the other positions are filled. The fire department contract is within the beginning of the next pay period, so we have up to a 14-day time frame to fill the non-entry level contract positions for fire.
Okay. Any other questions about, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Not really a question, but I guess more a statement. I deal in my full-time job with a lot of these engineering positions, and one of the things I hear from them is they're drastically underpaid compared to the private sector right here. So I don't know how much of these are really caused by people not wanting to relocate, and how much of it is we're paying, 60% of what the private sector makes here. So I guess I just throw
That's
that out there.
important.
It's not relocation, it's just that they wouldn't.
You can answer.
If I could, we did have a compensation study that was done in 2016, and for our engineering positions, we are paying up to 105% of the market rate based on that comp study. And the pay matrix has been adjusted by 1.5% going into 2019 to try to make sure that we're keeping pace with market. Our other positions that are not difficult to fill in management executive, we hire at 90% of market. So we are paying higher than the market rate to try to attract those positions to city employment.
If I may, though, is that market rate of municipalities or private industry?
It is of municipalities.
And I guess my argument would be we have some big engineering firms here in town, and so while it may be more than a municipality pays, it's not comparable to private.
And that is absolutely the case. The other thing that I will share is that just in talking with other peers at engineering firms, it's challenging across the board, public and private, to fill the engineering positions. So we do try to promote the CAPERS retirement system as an offset to the difference between the public wage and the private wage as well. But we very much are trying to be very competitive with our our public sector counterparts with our salary.
Well, I would say wait about a year, and when a recession hits, right now construction is hot.
Yeah.
Engineering positions are, you can almost write your own ticket right now. In a couple of years, it's cyclical, and we won't have this problem. So that was my prediction, at least, but it's never been correct in the past, so I don't know why.
I bet it has. You're not real old yet, but you've been around, right?
Yeah.
Another piece of information that I thought that would be useful was that we worked with our online application vendor and just requested what type of reporting might be available. And going back to 2014, so our time frame is 2014 through 2018, they were able to look at applicants that started the application process and indicated in the application that they were not willing to relocate to Shawnee County. And in that 4-year period, we've had 83 applicants, so about 20 a year that have indicated that they would not be willing to relocate when they started or completed an application for employment for open positions.
Okay. Please go.
Can you, out of how many applications total?
I don't unfortunately have the total number of applications. I can probably see if they can get us that number.
I mean, any guess? I mean, is it 1,000 or?
I would say probably in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 5,000 in a 4-year period, because we have we have open positions constantly.
Well, that makes a big difference in terms of what percentage is. That's a pretty small percentage then.
It is.
Rather than 80 out of 200.
And what I would comment on is some of these, though, are for those difficult to fill positions. So kind of correlating it back to our number of days open, this was insightful information from that perspective. So the probation officer, for example, and you might recall that we even had one of the candidates come and make a public comment about living outside of Shawnee County. So not real scientific, but just wanted to share this information that I wasn't aware that we could pull from the system.
I appreciate the Councilman Emerson. That was your question. Is that what you were hoping to get?
Yes, it was, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, I think, though, that the thing that I think we should keep in mind, though, is, you know, if our pay is the same, right, somebody may not want to move here. And if our pay is less in the position, can be in the private sector, they wouldn't be willing to relocate either, because they wouldn't take the job in the first place if it's less. And I know, I won't say the gentleman's name, but a traveling engineer that was here for several years, he told me at the time, he said, I love this job, I love being here, but, you know, I can make almost twice as much in Kansas City. And he did leave and go to that job in Kansas City. But it wasn't residency because he lives here. But it was the pay. So I don't know. I don't know how much changing the residency requirement will help us, I guess, in these positions. If I knew it'd make a huge difference, that would matter, but I don't know that it will.
Yeah, and the other recruitment attraction that I tout for Shawnee County is our cost of living is much less than the Kansas City area. And so that, but, you know, it's also a personal preference, but the pay goes further here than it does there as far as living.
Sure.
This is a complicated issue, so good way to start, I think. Other questions about that data? If you could double check the total, if it's possible to get it, that'll help us, but it does sound like 80, even out of, help me with the math, out of 3,000 is pretty small.
Yeah.
Right? 2%, thank you.
Thank you. The last piece of research that I had was regarding the residency requirement for Chattanooga, Tennessee. And their residency requirement is that you have to be a Tennessee resident. And I think that they are close on the border.
Yes, to
So
Georgia.
that might be why, but I thought that was an interesting requirement.
Yeah, that seems strange.
Well, in the literature that Liz was able to send us, the towns that were on the border had addressed in different ways that requirement, probably for the same reason, so. Do you want me to talk? Okay, I don't think Catherine had anything. Do you have any particular reports for us
No,
today?
I think the other information was provided by Liz, and
Okay.
Liz and Kelly went and verified a couple of the towns on that list that's provided to you to verify that what their status was. We had one list that we weren't sure who the author was, and so we decided the best to verify. One of the lists was created by our intern over the summer, so we knew it was valid. The other one, we could not determine who the author was, so Liz and Kelly went back and verified everything for you.
Okay, thank you. And just for the, do you have the extra copies of this with you? I do. Okay. Just so that people know what we have, and we have a couple extra copies if people want them, and also can send them electronically if people want them and want to be able to forward them, so no secrets. This residency requirement chart is what the city manager is referencing. We started at our first meeting with 2 different ones, and so the staff combined them. In simple terms, these are, I think with the exception of Kearney, Nebraska, all towns, a couple of counties in Kansas. There are 27 listed, and 20 of them do have residency requirements. So 74% have them. And so there's a fair amount of detail in terms of how that's applied and some notes to explain it if anybody wants to look at those. Liz did some research for us, and we've got 3 articles as well, each of them quite good, and together a pretty good collection of pros and cons. And this first one is from the ICMA, which is the International City Managers Association, and is a recent one from 2017. And it links into an ask and answer kind of a blog site that is actually kind of old, well, old like 2005, so not that old. Then there's an article from Springfield, Illinois, and the back and forth about them adopting a residency requirement fairly recently, I think 2016. And then an older one that actually is the precursor of the ICMA, but is a research document with pros and cons about how cities considered those decisions, and then some examples of some different cities. And from that, did you each get a chance to read those yet? Did you yet?
I had already read this one.
Okay.
I have not read the other one yet.
I did a summary, which you guys have in your stacks there, to try and pull together for us to talk about and sort through as we hear your testimony and then discuss exactly what the issues were. And if I may, I think I'll go through those just to get us all on the same page, and so that you know what the chair pulled out of those 3 articles in the conversations that we've had so far. As I see it, what we're starting with is that the city of Topeka has 2 primary goals. Those being success in recruitment and retention and performance, and a diverse and inclusive workforce. So with each of these, we're going to hear some testimony, and then what we're going to do is take your testimony, but kind of go through these and affirm or say, nah, that's not really so. Our only goal is this, or this reason is in here, but we don't think it's valid, so we're going to take it off our list as we consider pros and cons. So what we have now, as I mentioned, is the Shawnee County residency requirement with some details in it for our employees here. That morphed from being all in the city limits, and then managers in the city limits, and a contracted city manager in the city limits, but everybody else out in the county, and then finally stepped to everybody in the county, but with some travel requirements for emergency folks who might be called in for emergencies in particular. The options that I saw out of this collection and the conversation we've had so far would be certainly to retain what we have now. A number of the cities back off to simply essential services, either a number of miles, or miles from either their workplace or from the city limits, or a matter of travel time to either, for people that need to come in on an as-needed basis so that people can get to work. Some of those include managers and some don't, from the examples that we saw in our research so far. And we are open to more research, so I want you to know what we've got. Another option that we saw in the literature so far was a residency preference, was somehow an incentive, and we need to do more research on that, but perhaps just a bump in pay, maybe an extra 10 cents an hour or whatever it was for people who did live in the municipality, to encourage that there was a benefit in that in some way. Another that we saw in the literature was a residency hiring preference, that there was an orientation in the hiring to give a first preference to people who lived in that community. Again, we could do some more research about what that means in terms of recruiting, opportunities for job skill development, and so on. You can get that far, but a residency hiring preference. And then we also, thanks to Chief Duke, the issue of an earnings tax came up as well. The Metro Kansas City area has that, as well as Metro St. Louis. It's allowed for in a Missouri law to have in that case, it's a 1% tax. And And so you can, and there's another 1% if you don't live there and you earn your money there in the Kansas City area. In the material that we have, there's a reverse of that that's done where there is a local earnings tax for everyone, but it is, it's exempted if you live there as well. So, and it could be that those in metropolitan areas that straddle state lines are where those come from. Anyway, those were the options that I've seen so far in the literature and conversation that we've had. In terms of residency requirements and how those roll out, again, this article that we have reported that that about 40% of the cities that the IPMC had seen had some sort of residency requirement. Our sample, this limited sample of 27 from Kansas, or 26 in Kearney, Nebraska, was 20 out of 27. And this is current because Liz, you've confirmed that between Liz and Kelly, so it's current. In terms of how soon people have to live in the city, we had some discussion about this at our meeting prior. Common practice appears to be between 1 month, I mean, like as soon as you've gotten there, to 6 months. Our current requirement is 6 months after you have completed your probation, which means it's 12 to 24 months, depending on how long the probation period is in a different department. If somebody fails to move, what happens? The practices appear to typically, at least the policies typically say termination. One of them in the research is simply your probation got extended. You didn't get your full permanent employee status until you lived there. And so, again, a little more research might be in order if we want to look at that. But if that means that you're not eligible for COLA and you're not eligible for promotion or anything, you could kind of be on probation forever, but you aren't going anywhere. I don't know, but that's the way at least one municipality dealt with it, was just to extend your probation rather than let you go. In terms of exceptions to such rules, the only practice that we've talked about or that we've seen so far in the literature is that if there were to be an exception, it's by vote of the governing body, which of course then pushes transparency about the issue and the choice. In terms of the legalities of such a policy, it appears that state laws will apply and can vary. In the literature, the only place that became a problem was if the policy or practice proved to be racially discriminatory. The example in one of the articles was in a town that was largely a white suburban town, and by making a priority for local residents, therefore it put the minorities who live nearby in the bigger city at a disadvantage of getting the jobs in that town, and the courts ruled that that made it a discriminatory policy. The reasons to have them, and I'll just zip through them. Again, we may, in discussion, say, yeah, that's a good valid reason, or say it's not, but this is what the research pulled out so far. You want to have manpower in case of an emergency. The people who have to be there physically and have their hands on the throttle need to be there. Enhance quality of performance. The local people will do better, is an argument that gets made. Increase the likelihood of your employees interacting with community officials and with citizens. They're local, they know people, and they are known, that kind of thing. That correspondingly, that a local a resident employee would have a better comprehension of the problems in the community and more interest in the results of their work. There's a theory that would minimize absenteeism and minimize tardiness. Again, we can talk about that, look at it again. Certainly, a driver in a lot of communities was the potential economic benefits, that those employees were also taxpayers, in most cases because city jobs are generally reasonably well paid, that those folks would be homeowners, that the dollars would stay in the city and in the school districts in that community, discourage middle-class flight out of the city. Those are just not taking sides. Those are the arguments that are there. One of them said tax exemption purposes, and I'm not quite sure what that meant, but I put it in the list because maybe somebody else would. An argument that confidence in government is increased when government is managed by people who live there. That it improves job opportunities for local citizens, and if there's a difficulty, correspondingly a difficulty in hiring, that the city would work a little harder at finding citizens who were worthy of development into those job positions. And last, improve minority recruitment. That of course would depend on the minority concentration in the community and the surrounding areas. Last section of the research, reasons for not having residency requirements, would include that residency alone results in a less skilled workforce. The argument is made that if you want if you want people to live in the community, it requires better compensation. We've touched on that already a little bit. That residency reduces the liberty of the employee. They're feeling like that they can live their personal life however they want. Something we talked about in an earlier meeting is that there are more and more dual career families who may be geographically split because one works, for instance, here in Kansas City and the other in Topeka, and so they want to live in Lawrence, something like that. That you also find people, and this could be like the towns that Jackie was talking about, who live in the area around the city or county, who are well established in the small towns or rural communities that they live in. They're good people and would be great employees, but you're not going to get them if you make a move to town. The argument corresponding to the one for having residency requirements, also under not having residency requirements, could improve your minority recruitment. There's an argument made under not having residency requirements that it can improve the quality and scope of your recruitment. And last, that outsiders can bring fresh ideas and new operational program experience that can in fact enrich your city. So it's just the Cliff's Notes on the pros and cons and some of the things for us to consider. Anything to add to that before we open up for testimony? If not, I didn't do a sign up in terms of who would speak first, so, I'm sorry.
Just one point. I thought
Okay,
that
thank
you
you.
already had this information, but Kansas statute does prohibit imposing a tax on incomes in.
Right.
We know
You
that,
didn't.
so we would have to
Okay.
change the state law
Just
to
wanted
do that.
clarify. She just wanted to clarify.
No, thank you. And I brought it up last night when we talked about legislative agenda, because we have talked about that before. I've been on the council for 10 years, so I've been involved in this discussion before. And so, and I was involved when we opened it up to the county. And so we've explored that. But thank you for adding that, because it would be a challenge for us if we wanted to pursue it. Are you going to be first?
Mr. Bergman?
Please. And thank you all again so much for coming. Please introduce yourself, and whether you're representing yourself or a particular entity.
Thank you, council members and city manager and other city officials. My name is Matthew Bergman. I am a partner at the law firm of Frieden, Unrein, and Forbes in Topeka. We represent the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 3, as well as the IAFF Local 83. There are representatives from those organizations here today who will speak following me. We also represent the local AFSCME Water Union. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony. I've reviewed the matter, and I know it's under consideration. We understand that there are competing interests. Most first responders, law enforcement, utility workers, I think they have a belief that their work should allow them freedom to live where they can best provide their needs for themselves and their family. And Councilwoman Hiller, you spoke to that a few minutes ago. And I know from the public employer side, there is a feeling that potentially there's some requirement that employees should be required to live within a certain area, become an integral part of that area, and, serve and protect the communities that they're in. But I do know that many of the residency requirements in municipalities were put in, I would say, decades ago or generations ago. And times change, policies change. And I think what we have to look at is whether for our situation, whether a residency requirement is really applicable. From my client's perspective, one of the strongest arguments opposing a residency requirement would be that it prevents qualified applicants from applying for jobs. Everyone understands that tax dollars are scarce, that we have to be good stewards, good financial stewards of funds, but we want to get the best bang for our buck when hiring employees. And simply because someone lives across a certain geographical boundary, if they're the best person for the job, they're the best person for the job, and I would not want to have a prohibition from them coming in and giving their time, talent, and treasure to the city. And I think it somewhat behooves the city to look at that aspect, because at the end of the day, we all want the most qualified applicants in our most important positions here, regardless of where their address is. And you can make a strong case that our community is best served by the broadest pool of potential candidates for any position, and a residency requirement limits those opportunities. And I'll give you a handful of examples here, and then I don't want to be up here too long. I'll let the others speak. But with regard to the clients that I represent, an individual is paid to perform a specific job. They're paid a salary for that. You can ask the individuals after me, but if a police officer is performing his duties, or someone is responding to a fire, or if someone is fixing a water break, I don't know that the service they're providing to a person or a citizen, if they're going to stop and ask whether they live here or there. I think that they are more concerned about receiving the help or service that they need. You know, taxpayers pay taxes to receive specific services, regardless of where you live at. If you live in Topeka, there are tax implications. If you live in Lawrence, there are tax implications. But that is based upon whatever the municipality decides. And I don't know that a residency requirement should affect that. My clients are all professional employees. They work within specific guidelines. As long as there's no compromise to the service being provided, we don't believe that a residency requirement should be imposed, or we would at least argue against that. And what I mean by that is, as long as an individual shows up on time, does their job, understands their responsibilities, and what it takes to perform their duties, that's exactly what we want. And regardless of, again, whether someone is across a specific geographic line or maybe they live 5 minutes farther down the road, as long as they're doing what we're asked and they do it very well, I think that puts us in a very good position as a city. And as far as community, because Councilwoman Hillary spoke of that a little bit, I think community goes beyond any certain boundary line. And I'll just use myself as an example. I'll represent that I live north of Silver Lake. I live out there. I'm in the county. My kids are in the Silver Lake School District. But my employer, our business is in town. I sit on multiple community boards. We're invested as much as we can in the Topeka community. But employees, I think, need to have flexibility on what best suits them for whatever their life situation is at that time. And if you're given those options, if you're given that choice, I think that it may attract higher quality talent to our area. When I look at the fundamentals of where people choose to live, it does boil down to, I think, schools, services, healthcare, all those basic tenets. But you can't fit everybody into one specific mold, and you need to have some flexibility to allow individuals to, I would say, choose where they want to reside. And as long as they still provide their professional service, they shouldn't be discriminated against, or there shouldn't be a demerit against them simply because they choose to reside somewhere. I did pull out, for statistical purposes, in 1994, Nashville, Tennessee abolished its residency rule. And there was a concern at the time that everyone would somehow, move out of the city. Prior to that time, about 1% of Nashville's fraternal order police members lived outside. They were granted hardship exemptions. Over the years, that's fluctuated between 1 and 3 to 5%. So it hasn't been a huge migration. You haven't seen half of the FOP members, move outside. The point is that a vast majority will still choose to live in their employer's jurisdiction. But that flexibility allows more qualified individuals to have not only confidence in the city's policies, but also that flexibility where they can put their kids in the school that they choose, or if they choose to live in a rural setting versus an urban setting, they have that flexibility. And along those lines, I think there are some instances where residency requirements can be detrimental. And along these lines, I am thinking of families who may live in a certain jurisdiction that is outside of the bounds of our current residency requirement. They own a home, their children are maybe young or in school, and I think it is a monumental task to pick your family up and move to another jurisdiction. It really comes down to a choice between the employment or moving your family. And that's a very, very difficult decision, I think, for any family. For example, if a husband and wife, or if a couple lived in, let's say, West Lawrence, when I pull off the Lecompton exit, it says 16 miles to Topeka, and the interstate speed limit is 75 miles an hour. I would guess, I haven't timed it, but an individual residing in West Lawrence, if their spouse worked in Lawrence and their children went to school there, they could make it to City Hall more timely than somebody that lived in Auburn. But the problem is we have this Douglas-Shawnee County line in between. So does that imaginary line somehow create a prohibition, or should it create a prohibition on having someone come to work for us? I did pull some additional statistics. I've looked at some private sector figures. I do know that we have excellent companies in Topeka and Shawnee County who are in the private sector that do not have residency requirements. And I won't name those, but I think you can probably identify who I'm talking about. And that's because they want to pull from a broader talent pool. And they want qualified individuals who may not reside here to come work for them to have a more efficient, better work product.
Could I interrupt you briefly?
Sure.
Do any of them have residency requirements?
Not that I'm aware of.
Just checking.
No, I'm not. I was trying to think, and I tried to do as much research as I could, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
I did pull, and I don't have the article, I don't have the citation, but Public Management Magazine did conduct a survey in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and they looked at 32 chief executive officers, and they polled them regarding residency requirements, and they said that at least almost a third of them, 31%, had turned down or refused to apply for jobs simply because it had a residency requirement in it. Now, that is a high-level executive position, but I think the data is still applicable and can at least still be taken into consideration.
I'm sorry, where was that at?
That was in Massachusetts and Rhode Island.
Okay.
So, and it was just some data that I pulled up when I was doing my research.
Well, one of the issues, even in what you read and what research we've gathered so far, is it really can depend. If you're in a metropolitan area, you're in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, where all those municipalities are big and they're running into each other. It's a little hard to, similar to your West Lawrence comment in a
Sure.
way. You could get, depending on your transit and whatever, it might not matter because you're so, but out here where you're a little more, our city is a little more isolated.
Yeah, and I think
Not quite the same.
each study is probably different on the dynamics and the variables involved. I do know that my client would not support any more of a restrictive change regarding the
I don't think
the
we're going
requirements.
there.
And I
think
just
can safely
wanted
say
to
that
clarify
that's not
that.
on the table.
You know, and
This could be a dirty trick.
And, you know, from our perspective, if this matter is to move forward, we always welcome a conversation. We're glad to provide additional written statements or information. Happy to answer any questions. We want to be involved in the conversation. But those are my talking points for today, and I know there's others that are going to speak. But again, I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much for coming. I have one question, and my colleagues may have some as well. Do you have the numbers for how many officers in each of your unions, or at least the two that you're representing today, live inside the city versus out in the county?
I don't have that information available, but we could put it together, and I'm sure we can get it to you. I just don't have it in front of me right now.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it's somewhat of a moot issue, what I recall from conversations, really the last round, because this, we give Councilman Cohen the credit for bringing this forward as at least a discussion issue. It's been a while, and he had his reasons to do it, and we said we would do it. But the issues, again, kind of dial back to the community. And of course, the nature of police work and fire work as well is that the primary focus of the work is what I call the 3%, all the things that are bad and that are problematic, and not wanting, when you look at some of these reasons why people think the residency is important, is so people aren't afraid of the community that they're working in simple terms.
No,
That
I understand
they
that.
understand it and so on. So just if you can get it, just for interest, hold it against anybody.
I'd be happy to do
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us. I am Matt Blasingame. I represent the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 3. Kind of on that community aspect of it, I have lived almost my entire life outside of the city limits of Topeka. I grew up in Shawnee County, lived a few years in the city of Topeka, but I decided to raise my family outside of the city limits of Topeka. And with that being said, I still see the city of Topeka as my home. Even though I do live outside of the city limits, the city is my home. I decided to raise my family here, but I'm not in that geographical area of being inside the city, which I know the residency requirement doesn't call for the city, it calls for the county, that you live within the city limits of the county. From my personal experience, when I applied to be a police officer and when I joined this department, had that residency requirement said that I had to live in the city, I would not be here in front of you today because I would not be a city of Topeka employee. If I lived a few miles from where I live at now, outside of Shawnee County, I would also not be a city of Topeka employee because for me, like I said, I've already established that I decided to establish my family outside the city limits where I was at, and if I was outside of the county at the point I was at in my life and even where I'm at now, I decided to raise my kids in a certain area. I wouldn't want to uproot my kids and my wife to come to work for the city of Topeka. So for me personally, if it came down to a residency requirement and I was just outside of that, I wouldn't be working here right now. So I'd probably be working for another agency that doesn't have the residency requirement. So I can speak from that personally. What I can also say is from a recruiting, hiring, and retention standpoint, I want us to have the best applicants that we can have. I want us to cast that net as wide as we can to get the best people that we can, whether they're inside the city limits, inside the Shawnee County limits, or outside the city limits. We have people that can live in Perry, Kansas, for example. It's in Jefferson County. It's still probably 20, maybe 30 minutes to get here, but we could have a good qualified applicant who lives there, who grew up there, raising kids there, interested in working for the city of Topeka, but they just don't want to uproot and move here. So I think it's important that we broaden what we're looking at there to get potential candidates and applicants here. I looked at Liz's list that was provided, and just a few points on the list with some of the other municipalities that we're looking at. If I'm looking at this right, when it says no rule, it looks like there's 17 out of the 27 that have no rule at all for other employees. I know police and fire are a little bit more restrictive, but when we talk about the police and fire specifically, I think there's a few things that are important to note here. A lot of these municipalities that are on here are not comparable to us. I don't think Hayes is comparable with the Topeka Police Department or the city of Topeka. I don't think that Dodge City, a lot of these are not comparable in my eyes. When I look at our comparable cities, I would look at Wichita, Overland Park, KCK, Olathe, Lawrence, Shawnee County, and the city of Shawnee. Those are going to be our top 7 largest municipalities in Kansas. And when we break those down individually, the list provided says that Wichita has a 30-minute residency requirement for police and fire, that you have to be able to report within 30 minutes. In talking with Wichita, what they've told me is it's 30 minutes to the city limits. Well, we know that Wichita is a big city. It may take 30 minutes to drive across the city limits. So if we look at 30 minutes to the city limits, depending on which side of Wichita that you're at, you can be looking at not only living in Sedgwick County, but you can be in parts of Butler, Harvey, Cowley, Sumner, Kingman, and Reno. So again, they're really broadening that area out that we're looking for people. On the list provided, it says, I believe that Overland Park has a 45-minute response time. And the information I got from Overland Park PD, it's actually a 90-minute requirement, and there is no geographical requirement. And I think the fact that there's no geographical requirement is important, because you could even live in Missouri, as long as you can be there in 90 minutes. KCK, they do have the residency requirement of Wyandotte County. Of the 7 comparables, that's the only one that has a geographic area of that county that you reside in. Olathe is 45 minutes. I think the information provided did say 45 minutes, but again, there's no geographic requirement. So it's just 45 minutes. Again, you can live on the Missouri side. I think our 2 closest competitors, Lawrence and the Shawnee County Sheriff's Office, they don't have any requirement at all. So Lawrence has none. In the information provided, it says that there's no specific mile requirement. However, it says that you must respond in a minimum response time. According to the Sheriff's Department, there is no minimum response time. So it does mention a response time, but the information that they provided is we don't have a response time. So their effect is no requirement for residency for the Sheriff's Department. So, and then lastly, the city of Shawnee, they have no residency requirement at all. So that's all I have.
Could you chat for a moment, and others might want to do the same thing, as you talk about the response time? I think having been a manager and dealt with people who lived in Osage City versus across town and all those kinds of things, you want to be fair in what policies you have, so that internally within your department, people don't feel used. If they're the ones who's close and everybody knows they can call on so-and-so, they can get there right away, and whoever it is that lives way out in the boonies probably not even going to come in, or there's an assumption or a concern about that. Do you think that's a valid concern to have?
Do I think that a response time is a valid concern to have?
And is it worth having a response time, at least departmentally, for those of you? And it could be police, fire, water main breaks. We have some protocols that we have to hit, because we promise people that if there's a water main break, we're going to have somebody on site in 30 minutes or 45. And so obviously that correspondingly has to go out to passing the baton around the department to get somebody in a truck and on site to stop something.
In my experience, the response time has never been an issue, because in my 9.5 years with the police department, there's never been an all hands on deck where we've called everybody and said that you need to be here. Some of the more tenured people in the room, they can talk of whether there's been an instance where we've called everybody in. But response time, other than showing up for my shift, sometimes if they call us and looking for people to come back, because we're low on manpower and they call you back and they want you to voluntarily come in to work some overtime, I don't see an issue with whether it was 30 minutes or an hour or.
It would almost be, I mean, since we have the residency requirement, everybody's close. It would almost be just sort of thinking it through and, thinking about just those internal personnel kinds of things that go on. And we used to have it with the smokers, how come they can take breaks all the time? They're out back smoking while everybody else is in here working. It's whatever those, it's just an example.
Sure.
Just when did you react? Well, before you sit down, I think, for those who don't know Officer Blassingame, I met him because he was one of our community officers, and he also is the officer in public housing right now, and is fabulous. So pretty good
Thank you.
example that you don't have to live in the neighborhood to do a
Thank
good
you.
job. So, thank
Can I
you.
ask a
Yes.
question? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I was wondering, you said you lived in the city one time and then you moved out.
Uh-huh.
Did the residency requirements, did that influence your decision of where to move to?
I did not, when I lived in the city and moved out, I was not a city employee at that time. So I moved back into the county
Before.
when I bought my first house. So it was before
Okay.
I became a city employee.
Okay. That wasn't a trap to try to get you to say something. I was just, all I was trying to get at is, does a residential requirement encourage people to buy, within our county? And that's what I was wondering about, so.
Gotcha. I can only speak for myself, and for me, I grew up in a certain part of the county, a certain school district, and that's where I was born, raised,
Sure.
grown. My parents stayed in that particular area, and I chose to move close to my family and stay in that particular area, which I think is kind of important for the recruiting and hiring and retention. If we have somebody that's just outside of Shawnee County who grew up in, like I said,
Osage
Perry
City or whatever.
or Grantville or Meriden or something like that, I think we can still get somebody that's a very qualified employee who wants to work for the city, but they just live right outside that geographical boundary, and because we don't allow them to work here, well, they're just going to drive to Lawrence, or they're just going to drive to the sheriff's department to have them as their employer. So that's why I think that it's important to open that up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. Next.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Kent Biggs. I'm a detective here at the police department. I'm representing the FOP. Just a couple personal points to bring up to you. I don't have a big elaborate speech like my counterparts here.
That's okay.
A lot of times we hear things like, well, they didn't want to take the job because they had to move here. I've been skeptical of that in the past. And like, okay, well, give me an example of somebody that did that. Just last week, I won't go into details because I don't want to, this is a public hearing, I don't want to compromise other people's safety, but just last week, I specifically ran into somebody who is in this exact position. And they did not want to, or they did not apply to the City of Topeka Police Department because they would have to sell their house and eventually move to within Shawnee County. They live 4 minutes from the City of Topeka, city limits. But they can't maintain their residence there that they own because of the residency requirement. We are missing out on a qualified candidate who has experience that we would all love to work with, but his wife, his kids, they're established where they're at, they're going to school where they're at, they're not going to move. So we're not having that opportunity to hire them. You asked Matt earlier about when he lived in the city and if he chose to move to the county and stuff like that. I did, when I first I moved here from Wichita. I worked in Mulvane prior to that. I moved here in Topeka when I was in the academy, bought a house down off Burlingame. Great place, great house. Got married. My wife moved here. We decided that eventually when we have kids, we want to be in a different school district, not in 501. So actually it was one of 2 different districts. So both of which the majority of the housing that we were looking for was in the Shawnee County outside of the city limits. But at that time, we just had the county residency. So we knew we had to stay in Shawnee County. and that's what we did. We wound up buying a house, brand new house, and then not too long after that, Officer Blasingame moved in as my next door neighbor, so we said, it's time to go, got to leave, there goes the neighborhood. So actually, a couple years later, we wound up building another house because our family got bigger, and but we wanted to stay in the same area because that's where we had established ourselves at. So that's where we built the house, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying where we're at until I retire, hopefully.
So you were worried that we were here to narrow it up?
No, not necessarily. I wasn't concerned about you
Okay.
making it more restrictive because, quite honestly, that's covered in our contract,
Yeah,
and
you're grand.
without a contract change, you can't do that. So I wasn't worried about that. I'm looking for the best people that we can get to come and work here to be the guy beside me out there on the street, guy or gal. I'm not trying to be sexist here or anything, but the best person to be out there. I want the best people, okay? My sons have talked about being police officers in Topeka. I want the officers that are in Topeka that he may have to work with someday to be the best people that are going to be possible, that we can get. If they live in Lawrence, they live in Douglas County, if they live somewhere else, Burlingame, wherever, I don't care as long as they're the best people for the job, okay? And if we can just broaden our horizons a little bit, so to speak, and see that we're missing out on these people, and we truly are, okay? I think you'll hear from our hiring recruiting sergeant here shortly, and that's one of our, I think one of the three main issues that we have. One was pay, one was residency, and I can't think of what the third was. We come a long way on the pay, as you all know, and we greatly appreciate that. We really do. There's just one more component of that that we now need to do, and it's not just us, it's the fire department as well. They're having issues as well getting qualified people in to get them in the seats in the academy to do the same job. And that's what you guys are paying us for, is to do the job. It's not that we don't love being in the city or don't, we do all of our shopping here. We still are in the city all the time. We just need this extra component to make it better.
Thank you. Do you have comments, questions?
Thank
Anything
you.
else?
No, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Freeman. I'm the president of Topeka Firefighters Local 83. I have less of a speech than both of those all three of those guys over there. On behalf of my membership, our membership, we would like to see the residency taken away. That requirement is beginning to hurt, as Kent said, our recruitment, and it's starting to hurt our retention in the fire department too. Fire department has a long history of once they come on the job here, guys and gals stay until retirement. I am aware of a handful of individuals who are in hiring processes of other cities strictly because of the residency requirement. So one thing that I would hate to see is Topeka become a stepping stone in the fire department for people. That is not something that from a safety standpoint is good for the citizens or for the firefighters. I think, Chief, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the last numbers I got that I heard just the other day from the latest test that the fire department gave, we had 16 people sign up. I believe 8 took the test and 6 people passed. We have more vacancies than that. And of those 6 people that passed, I bet we lose half of them through the process or better. So we can't continue to do that on an annual basis. we are missing out on candidates in Jackson County, Osage County, and Douglas County. These are real individuals that we've had contact with who said they would love to come work for the city of Topeka, but they're not going to uproot their families and move. So it's a dilemma that we're facing. I think it's been a long time coming, the city of Topeka, but it's something that I think we need to address. Me personally, and maybe you guys can correct me, I don't see, if the policy gets changed and there is no residency restriction, I don't see how that hurts the city of Topeka. I don't see a mass exodus of people that are currently employed, that currently have their families established, whether it be in the city of Topeka or Shawnee County, uprooting and going someplace else. It's just not reality. But we can attract people to come, good quality candidates to come work for us. And so that's what we would like to see. So that's all.
Questions?
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Mr. Freeman, thanks for coming and talking. I did have a question, like in particular with the fire department, and I don't know how it works with the police, but is there an age limit on, I mean, you can't be 50 years old, can you, and go through the academy, or can you?
Yeah, currently I do not believe that there is an age limit for hiring. 21 is the minimum. I don't believe there's a maximum.
There's not an age limit on hiring. You have to be at least 21, and we have mandatory retirement for fire at age 60.
Oh, okay.
But you could be 55 and go through the academy.
Okay, because one of the things, I think it might have been your wife's boss came and spoke to this, that at his company, they found that once somebody is a certain age, right, 25 or something, once they have kids, especially and they're in a school, they wouldn't move. And I'm just trying to wonder if, for a younger person like from Osage or Jackson County or something, if they get on the Topeka Fire Department, I would think they would want to move, especially if they're not established somewhere. Is that, can you tell me?
That's certainly a possibility. I would say people in some of those counties have family property or family farms or something that they're not going to move away from. But it is possible that, you're right, the younger they are, the possibility is higher that they would move into the city or the county. But as of right now, that's not happening.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask you some questions about recruiting, and just because you happen to be there this time, other people could answer this as well. We have priorities, particularly with the fire department, the police department, but citywide, really, to diversify our workforce. So when you talk about opening up outside the city limits and therefore hiring from Wabunsee County, Jackson County, and so on, that is maybe low-hanging fruit, one might argue, because they're close by, but my guess is those are white males, the examples that you're thinking of. If we are really wanting to diversify our workforce, even though that looks like an easy solution, should we be doing something different? And tell me if the fire department is doing something different. You know, if instead we just should be focusing on finding women and minority men and women from wherever we can find them and encouraging them to move here, that would accomplish the diversity goals that we have. If we just opened up the county line boundary, would we say, oh, well, we don't need to worry about that because these folks are right here, and then fail to do our diversity? Could you respond to that
I don't know why you can't do both at the same time. I don't necessarily think just because you open up the boundaries for the residency that you stop recruiting maybe in the inner city of Topeka.
Could you talk about what recruiting, if you're the right person to ask, what recruiting we're doing right now for fire? And where we are recruiting?
I would not be the right person to answer that question.
This gentleman's done. I'm part of the recruiting.
Okay.
For the Topeka Police Department, so I'll speak right after you.
You'll speak for police, and you all are recruiting separately?
I assume we do, but I'm not part of the recruiting team.
Human Resources helps out.
Hi, my name is Vidal Campos, and I work with the Topeka Police Department. I've been here for 15 years. Currently, I've been on the recruiting team, and I'm now the recruiting and hiring sergeant over in the training division, or the training bureau. I've been there for, about 5 months now. Before that, I was part of the recruiting and hiring, but only as an officer, and I was there for a little bit over a year. So I've been doing it for almost 2 years now, and I can tell you, I've looked at the numbers for the past 3 years. I can tell you that we've lost good applicants because of them moving into the city. And I can tell you is that, and here's
Minority applicants or white
minority applicants, and I can tell you, and even people from out of state.
Okay.
I don't know if you know this, but Fort Riley is literally just 45 minutes from here. I was one of the first to actually take the test on site because honestly, I know how the first sergeants are. They're, hey, you know what, I'm not gonna give you the time to go out there. So you know what, I was like, I'll come to you. You don't have to come to us. But here's the deal is that we're losing applicants because they want to stay in the Midwest, especially I'm from Texas, and I can tell you that I like 4 seasons. I can tell you I saw snow once growing up. So I like this kind of stuff. And I can tell you that I've seen applicants that want to stay here, but they're like, really, do I have to stay in Shawnee County? My wife wants to work in Riley County. She already got a job there. I've been stationed at Fort Riley for already X number of years. My wife's willing to budge to move to Wamego, but I can't. And that's just one example. And he goes, I really want to work here, but I have to settle for Riley County PD. I mean, really? I mean, this guy was a solid applicant who's done 3 tours and has a bachelor's degree. You know what I'm saying? Qualified. Clearly, he went through our process because he wants to be here. But when I tell him that you have to move here, he's like, yeah, my wife's not budging. And it's not the pay, because he's getting paid more at Riley County. I can tell you that much right now. It wasn't the pay. He wanted to work for this agency, but because he couldn't live in Wamego, he had to settle for second best. And that's just one example. I'm telling you, I've looked at the numbers, and the people that are voluntarily withdrawing is because the city is, and I hate to use this word, is being a bully and saying, you have to live here. I just don't like being told where I have to live, because the people that want to work here are qualified applicants. It's not about the money. It really isn't. It's because they come from different parts of the state and they like the Midwest, and they like different parts, whatever it is. Maybe they like rolling hills, they like over here, they like being closer to a certain lake, whatever the case may be. Maybe they like Carbondale, maybe they like the smaller city life, but the entertainment is here. Hey, I'll spend my money here, but I like the smaller city life. I've already lived in a big city. I don't want to live there. I still have to, if I live in Shawnee County, I still have to come here to do all my shopping, do all that stuff. What they want to do is live like in Silver Lake, Rossville, Wamego, Carbondale, Burlingame, but still work for the bigger city because they like the action. They're not going to get it in the county, and they want to be what they say real police officers. This is a career choice that they want to make, and they can't do it because their hands are being tied and they're like being forced to live within the city limits or within Shawnee County. And that's why we're losing good applicants. I can tell you that 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were getting anywhere between 300 to 400 applicants a year. We're now averaging about 75 a year. Out of those 75, we're losing at least half of them on voluntary withdrawals because either they want to move or they want to work for us, but they really can't, or they get another job offer a little bit quicker somewhere else. But my case is that the living here is that ties them up, because a lot of them, their families are already establishing somewhere else, especially like in Lawrence, especially my military guys. You know what I'm saying? I'm losing them, and fast. And that's what they're doing. They're going somewhere else.
May I ask?
Please.
Thank you for coming and speaking. Yeah. It is puzzling to me that, especially with the military guys, because you think, when the Army's going to send you to Fort Riley, you don't have the opportunity to say, no, I live in Chicago, so I'm not going to go. No, wherever the Army says you'll go, or the Air Force says you'll go, or the Marines, you just go and you don't have a choice. So I'm kind of puzzled that people who have had this life moved around they've probably only been to Fort, in that area for a couple of years at that point. It's surprising they'd be reluctant to move.
I was the same way.
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I came from Texas. I did 6 years in the Army. As a matter of fact, my last duty station was Fort Riley.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? It was the way that person that came and sold it to me, the recruiting officer that came and sold it to me, he sold it to me like I was hooked. I was like, man, I'm here. You know what I'm saying? I am trying to sell it to them, but my obstacle is this right here, is you having to live here. I'm having to slowly but surely remove some of those obstacles, and I'm willing that you guys are willing to help me out. I'm telling you that right now, this is an obstacle because my pool has gone from 300 to 400 to 80 now, so my pool's a lot smaller, and the ones that do want to stay here, I'm now losing them because they don't want to move here.
Now, assuming your pool size got back up to that again, would it no longer be an obstacle?
Probably not, but I just don't know that.
Again, my premise kind of is right now, we're at the top of the economy. In a year, you're going to have 200 applicants. In a couple of years, I think you'll have 300 again.
I can tell you that nationwide, everybody's in that same pool. We are just staying. It's not the economy. It's that nobody wants to be a police officer. So do you think you want to get shot at on a daily basis? Do you think you want to be on the news on a daily basis? That is our obstacle. It's right there. It's not that.
Right.
It's just that that's our pool. It went because everybody wants to do it to like, hey, you know what? I don't want to be on the news. You think I want to be sued? No. I mean, do you want to be sued on a regular basis? Of course not, sir. It's stressful. I guarantee you probably lose sleep. But we still do our job, and we still come in and day out, regardless of whether we just did this crime or whatever it was, or they said, hey, you know what? You just shot somebody. Now you're put on administrative leave. Now I'm going to investigate you. I mean, you see all that, and now you're asking me to even live here? I mean, it's an impossible task. So what I am saying to you is that I need your guys' help in order to start recruiting people. And I can't do that without your guys' help. And like I said, I moved here because it's the Midwest. I mean, you see what I'm saying? I came back. I mean, I was born and raised South Tech. I mean, as south as you can get. You know, I can throw a rock to Mexico. That's how close I was to the border. So when I moved up here, I really enjoyed it. But I had a good recruiting officer that was able to pitch it and sell it to me. I am telling you that this is an obstacle for me, and that is where I'm at this point. And I'm not. It's not because of the economy. It's not anything to do with that. It's because of police business, and people just don't like being in the news. And this is where we're at, and this is life, and that's just the way it is. And in order for us to continue to get good applicants and serve the city the proper way, the right way, this is what we need to do. So, thank you for hearing me out, and you guys have a good day.
Thank you.
I have
Go ahead.
a question for you, and I'm worried that it just lit it out of my head, so. Give me a second. It was right there.
No problem.
One of the reasons that this comes up is because as elected officials, we have to be responsive to what the citizenry wants. And it is not uncommon, as you know, to have the citizens go, no, why don't we hire our own people? Whether it's advocates for minority individuals, whether it's people who are proud of the people in Topeka and think we should get our own and drop. You get that advocacy all the time. And one of the articles that Liz was able to surface for her, and that's where they put a residency requirement in only 2 years ago. They did a plebiscite first, and they had over 5,000 people who voted, and it was 69% that they wanted residency. Now, some of the commentary was, sort of buyer's remorse, and some of the folks didn't realize that that meant they were cutting out people in the immediate suburbs that they knew and that were their families and so on. But one of the reasons that happens is people are proud of their city, or they want to be, and they want those quality individuals as part of their city. And so if somebody doesn't want to live in the city, then they feel like they've been rejected. Somebody else talked about schools a little bit. Do you think that and any answer is okay, we're just trying to have some safe conversations about this, that for the most part, it's because of like the split residency, like you're talking about with the gentleman whose wife works at Fort Riley, or people are settled in small towns anyway, or grew up in one and want to live in one, or that they just don't want to live in Topeka. What's the sense that you get from the ones that you're familiar with?
Honestly, I don't know, Ned. I don't have the
Okay.
answer to that because, like I said, I didn't grow up in Topeka, but I'm vested to this city now. If you tell me I am from Topeka, flat out, even though I was born and raised in Texas.
But we're sensitive about that, obviously, and as a community, we're working really hard on
And
that,
I
with quality of
completely-
place and quality of life and so on,
And I
so that
completely
Topeka is a place
understand.
people want to live.
Of course, but in order for us to give you that protection, that blanket of protection that you need good qualified officers. And if I can't get them from Topeka because they're not wanting to come and test for us, and then I have to look somewhere else. And if that's their only hangup is that, and that's why I'm losing almost half of my pool, and then that's an issue.
One of the arguments we get is, you should try harder. We have good people here in Topeka. React to that, please, for me.
Trust me, ma'am, I've been doing really hard. I work diligently to try to find good applicants. As a matter of fact, I mean, my main focus was here in the city, and now I'm having to look somewhere else. Like
And I know
said,
both of you, I mean, they first have to agree to come and sit for the test, and they have to pass it,
It
whether
is.
it's the cup test or the written test or whichever one.
So there's a lot of obstacles in place. I can tell you that Human Resources has worked with us
Okay.
a lot. I can tell you that the chief's focus, right now, and I think in my eyes, is his number one focus. Like I said, we're staying afloat right now, and I don't know how fire's doing, but I can just speak for myself. And I've talked to some of their guys over there, and they're in the same boat. But I'm telling you, it's getting worse and worse. So I have to look somewhere else. Because people just don't want to be police officers. So if I can bring them from outside of the city or from other states and bring them here, even if they're not living within the city, at least they're coming here and they're working for us. And eventually, hey, who knows? They might even move here. You know, I live in the city now, you know, but that's my choice. But like I said, we need to start looking at something else and what's going to help us out in the long run. And I'm telling you that this is one hurdle. I'm hoping that you guys can help us out in that hurdle, and so that we can start getting more people in the city. So, thank you.
I appreciate that. I mean, we just really want those answers. We need to give those answers. I mean, and fire, Aaron was able to duck out of this conversation, but, you know, proudly announced that they just hired their first woman in 17 years. And a lot of people want to make sure that's not the last woman for a while. And so, you know, the question that will come back to us is something like, well, if they were just trying harder to hire women, maybe they'd have a bigger class or something. And we're not recruiting for you, so we don't know those answers. And so to be able to answer how you are recruiting, and that if this were to change, with some confidence that we could say to whoever that work at diversifying the force was going to maintain or improve, would be important for us. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Sergeant Campos, you know, when you're talking about, you know, the reasons people don't want to be police officers, I found that, you know, very persuasive. The issue here is, though, what we're considering is, you know, there's a lot of things you mentioned there that are very particular just to being a police officer that, you know, no other department, frankly, in the city would have to contend with. One of the issues is, though, this rule, if we're contemplating a change, it would probably be citywide, you know, it'd be all departments. So that's what makes it tough. And I don't know if there's something different we could do for police. I mean, we probably can't take away those other things, unfortunately. I agree. You guys have an extremely tough job. So I do appreciate your service. And like I said, I don't know where this is going to go, but get back out there and keep recruiting. So
I'm going to try my best. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully I get your guys' help and on board on this, because we really do need your help. All right? We can't do it without you, honestly. All right?
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And again, I'm going out of my way to throw out some of those squishy issues, so you guys will feel free to talk about them, because we
Yeah.
just really want to know. Chief. Checking his name tag to see who he is.
Yes,
All right.
thank you
Oh.
for
You want to take,
Do you want a break?
we want to,
Sorry.
had a short
No,
break. It's been an hour and a half, thank you.
Well, I can leave, I mean, I
Can you,
I'll be
okay.
back in just a few minutes.
All right. You go ahead, and then we'll take a short break after. you're
Okay.
finished.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Accent, though.
Oh, okay.
I know for a fact that we're working diligently with HR to try to recruit individuals that are representative of the community. Unlike PD, we do have certain other requirements for someone to apply. 21 years of age. They must be a Kansas certified EMT minimum. They have to have a Kansas driver's license, which they can take care of after they're hired. And it's really hard to recruit into just EMTs, no matter whether they're a male, female, or minority. You asked what's going on that we're doing to help us, especially with working with obviously with the HR, but also our recruitment teams. It's a mixture of employees, minority, female, veterans, that we send out not only to the high schools, but they're going to middle schools now to try to plant the seed. And then with TCALP now being on board, we're working with them. They do have a fire program, and they do concentrate on those middle school and high school individuals who have an interest in the fire service. Our numbers are a lot lower than the police department because of the certifications that are required to serve the city of Topeka. You must maintain your EMT certification. You have to maintain your driver's license. But like I say, the numbers that are coming in are really under numbers from 10 years ago. Me personally, when I started the fire service, there was 800 people took the written test for 10 positions. We're taking the written test now. We're doing it online. They were signing up online. They got all the information, and then now they come and they have a standardized test that could be validated in court if anybody tried to challenge that it was an appropriate test. And HR are the ones that have led that way to make sure what we're testing our candidates meet all the requirements as for state and federal laws. Like Aaron did indicate, we only had 16 people on the last go-around. And of those, I think, Aaron, I may be down to 5. I'm not too sure if it's even 6.
I believe we're at 6 now.
6 people. These are honestly, public service is the greatest job in the world. But now younger people are not looking at it that way. They've got other avenues that they want to chase for their dream or their career. But 16 people applying for a job that they have to have certain certifications, that the numbers are just not there. So is residency a hurdle? It is. With any community, that's a hurdle. If someone doesn't want to move the roots up their families and move and everything. I think someone indicated about Overland Park. They do not have a residency law. It's the same with their fire department. Their chief actually lives in Missouri. The chief of the Overland Park Fire Department lives in Missouri. He has been given a fire department car, and he's got Missouri Tiger license plates that he drives to work every day, and on the front of it, it says Overland Park Fire Department Chief. So, like I say, this is national. This isn't just a
Right.
Topeka issue. And some communities have basically turned in the way with, okay, if we did not have a residency requirement, could it improve our chances for hiring minorities, females, African Americans, or whatever? Yes, it could have a positive effect on that. We have one of our candidates who's actually come from Chicago. But we have actually lost candidates like the police department because they decided they did not want to live in Topeka, whatever reason. It could have been family, and there were qualified applicants. A few of them, I think out of the last 4 classes, we have lost 4 paramedics that had applied. And it was the reason they didn't want I talked to them after, said, could you tell me why? Can you
Were
tell
they
me?
from the area, or were they from like out of state and just decided they'd rather live in
No,
Chattanooga?
these were area individuals.
Okay.
One of them actually works for AMR locally. One of them lived in Lawrence. One of them was from one of the smaller communities. I'm not too sure which community it was, but there were 4 in the last 4 classes that they decided to not pursue coming to Topeka, although I think it's the greatest job in the world, But it's something that we're all facing. This is not just Topeka. It's going on all across the country, and some communities have just looked at doing away with the residency requirement to see if that improves the odds. And obviously the recruitment officer, Sergeant, did indicate that he feels, he's passionate about it, that this could improve the numbers. As of minorities, like I say, having the EMT certification, having to drive to Kansas City to take the CPAT test, which is the Candidate Physical Agility Test, is a big hindrance, especially for those who may not have the means to drive there. We have actually had candidates who have come on, sorry, let me rephrase that. We've had candidates who have applied, taken the CPAT test, passed it. The city reimburses them the money for taking that test to try to help to get us more applicants, and then they turn around and go somewhere else. They've got the CPAT certification, now I can go apply in a lot more different places where maybe I want to work. So, like I said, this could be one less hurdle. I would like to have it considered a lot, to see if it does help with public safety. And I understand with the other jobs within the city, the engineering jobs, that individuals, for whatever reason, do not want to move to Topeka. I moved here. I love it. I live downtown by the Iron Rail.
District 1.
So, and ma'am, in your district, as you indicated there. So,
Can you provide us, or any of you here, a lot of times people drop that residency requirement because they hope that it will improve their competitiveness. If you or any of you can provide us with some research, articles, documentation that it actually does work, it would be helpful.
I think at this point in time, this is a new hurdle that's raised.
Well, it's come up for years and years and years, and even here.
But we're having enough candidates to fill the jobs within the county itself. It went from the city to the county.
Mm-hmm.
There were enough candidates. Now we're seeing there are less.
Well, but you also have, you and both of you, police and fire, because I've been on council for 10 years, but sat through city council meetings for about 40. The fallout rate in terms of interest and initial applicants and people that actually show up for tests, I've been hearing that for years. It's not brand new. And I'm not saying it's not significant, but it's not brand new. And then people that pass the test and eventually end up being invited to be in the class.
Those particular numbers, no. I mean, I've been here 20 months. Mm-hmm. I'd have to fall back on maybe HR for those.
Just asking.
That data.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions? Do you want me to repeat that, sir?
Yes, could you please start again?
Okay. Before Chief Cochran comes up, does anybody else want to take a 5-minute break, or are we good with just continuing?
I'm fine now.
Okay. Then we'll continue. Come on up. Thank you.
Thank you. You heard Sergeant Vidal Campos talk about recruiting. What I'd like to talk to you about recruiting, what I can tell you is, in the city of Topeka, we cannot find enough qualified candidates to fill the position for a police officer. So we have to look outside. And when we go outside, what I have to look at is going far enough outside that moving to Topeka is not going to be an issue. And so our robust recruiting effort is focusing on universities, colleges, and military installations in the 4-state region, and that being Missouri, Colorado, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. And so after the first of the year, we're going to start rolling that out. And so residency will not be an issue in the aspect that these individuals are going to live far enough away that they're going to have to move here. The problem we have is there's a lot of qualified candidates between Topeka and the Missouri state line and Topeka and Hays, Kansas, and Topeka and Omaha, and Topeka and Oklahoma City. And we're missing out on those qualified applicants in the aspect that if they are born and raised in Wamego, Kansas, and Sergeant Campos said they want to be a real police officer, then they want to work in Topeka. And so that becomes an issue because they're born and raised in Wamego, Kansas. But do we disqualify that good candidate because they live 45 minutes away, 40 minutes away, or whatever it is? And so all I'm asking, as I think everybody else is, that this panel give the city of Topeka a fair leg and be competitive on the overall recruiting effort for all city employees. Because we're not just talking about law enforcement, we're not just talking about the fire department. You talk about the street department. Finding qualified candidates who have a commercial driver's license is very difficult to do. But when you go to those smaller communities, a lot of them have CDLs, and they have that endorsement. But they don't want to live in the city of Topeka. They don't, maybe don't want to live in the county. They want to live in Carbondale, Kansas. They want to live in Osage County. They want to live in Osage City. But when you talk about, I know Shawnee County Refuse, for example, cannot find enough CDL drivers without history, to hire to fill their driver's positions. So if they're having trouble filling those positions, I'm sure we're having trouble too. And so we're not just talking about the police department and the fire department. We are talking about the city of Topeka as a whole and giving all of our departments a competitive edge and being able to recruit and bring in qualified applicants to fill positions that are open.
Gentlemen?
Yes.
Chief Cochran, thanks for coming here, although you're here all day anyway, so I guess you just walked down from your office.
I'm almost on overtime.
Oh, hey, well, hold on. If you get over to get out, no. I do have a question. Obviously, we had a pretty robust discussion about the police contract, and one of the reasons why I think we made a pretty significant investment in especially raising starting salaries was that was going to move the needle on recruitment. I'm sure, I guess it's probably too early to tell, but has that had the impact, or do you know yet?
We don't know that impact yet because that takes effect January 1, and we are in the hiring and recruiting process for an April academy. But I can tell you that we just had interviews today. As a matter of fact, another round of them. We're going to have a pretty good pool, and I think a lot of that has to do with the aspect that when our recruiters are out there talking to individuals, we can say, hey, this is what you're going to be starting at come January 1. And so I think we've got that piece fixed. And the only other piece I think that that maybe needs to fall in line is the residency. And again, Sergeant Campos is on the front line on the day in, day out. He knows what the residency does. I got to be honest with you. I really don't know personally how much of an impact the residency has, but I can tell you this, and I know Councilwoman Hiller, you talked about, well, we need to do a better job recruiting female employees or whatever, but I'm going to tell you what, the Topeka Police Department's hiring and recruiting plan is pretty solid, and you're not going to find anyone in the Midwest, I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to match up to our recruiting efforts. And we are seeing that turn around. The last two classes have been very good classes, but what I can tell you about the fire department's process and our process, you're going to get the best candidate in the process. It doesn't matter who they are, what they do, where they come from. You're going to get the best candidates because of our processes. And as a result, the best candidate rises to the top. We got to go out and find those candidates. And what I'm telling you, we got to go on the road to do that. But we got to go on the road far enough that we don't have that one last hindrance that's in the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could either stay or go, but I'll look to Jackie at this point. Are the other departments doing the kind of creative recruiting that the police department is doing?
Yes, particularly for those more difficult to fill positions. And so it's a little different because police and fire have the academies and there's the pre-employment testing. But, you know, our hiring managers are going to trade conferences within the industry and trying to recruit in that manner. We are doing nationwide recruitments with professional associations. So we are trying to implore those same principles across all departments. Chief mentioned the CDL. That is a big hindrance right now with our street maintenance positions particularly, and also with some of our utility positions. And those are more entry-level positions, so there's not the trade associations, but we are trying to work with the high schools. And what I would say is that if the residency requirement was removed, that doesn't mean we're going to stop our local recruitment efforts. We're still going to go into the schools and try to go to the local organizations at the local events and continue that recruiting. It just allows us to cast a wider net.
So for things like engineers, let's say, are we going, if we are wanting minority employees and minority engineers, for example, are we going, for instance, to the historically black colleges to recruit?
We've not physically went to a lot of far away college job fairs, but certainly we're going to, you know, K-State, we're going to KU, Haskell University, so we are trying to target universities with a larger diverse populations for recruitment of all of our positions.
Because it would seem that if we're making more affirmative efforts to go places where there would be a large pool of minority and women prospects, we'd have a better chance at recruiting a pool back here.
And we are recruiting on Fort Riley for those engineering positions as well, because there are, you know, they're enlisted covers all careers. And so we do police and fire recruitment, but we also do general recruitment on Fort Riley.
But we're not going outside Kansas at this point for our other positions, like chief is.
Only if hiring managers are going to national conferences and touting the positions, and we are doing nationwide recruitments with those national trade associations, such as the APWA for our engineering positions. And so, but direct travel, not on as wide of a span.
I don't know with social media and with associations whether you have to go personally or not. I don't think so. I don't want us to fail to do that, you know, to have that even be an option if we're not doing everything we can to do that recruiting already. It's just too easy to fall back. So I wanted to have that conversation now.
And I think as we look at that, people that are seeking those types of positions, no matter what nationality they are or ethnic background they are, they're looking in those locations. That's the way that people are finding out about jobs that are open. And so we're in the right locations. We work with the department director to find out which associations they belong to, which ones are prevalent within their field, to make sure that we're in the right places. And that was evident with our advertising that we did for our finance director. We're out there in those particular areas, and it landed us a very diverse group of individuals that apply.
Okay, I mean, for the same reasons that cities or private companies have trouble attracting those candidates, they aren't necessarily the first ones to step up and become active in a student level professional association, or certainly a higher level. So it can take some, not suggesting hiring anybody that doesn't meet the best, that isn't the best candidate, but some affirmative recruiting to make sure we're getting a pool.
If I could, two comments. One thing I think that Sergeant Camp has touched on a little bit, but the other thing I think too with a residency requirement, there's some generational aspect to it. People don't like to be given boundaries. They like to have that freedom to choose a little bit. So I think that with our younger generations is a component of the residency. Necessarily being told something doesn't set well all the time. So and we can work through that, but I do think it's worthy of mentioning. Another thing is we had a sign-up sheet at the front, but I don't think that everyone signed in, and I just didn't know if it was okay to see if there were people that did want to speak, and if you didn't sign up, maybe make sure that we passed that around.
Sure. We've had a couple latecomers, otherwise I think people are signed in.
I didn't sign up, but I do
Well,
have a
then-
couple things to say.
Can you hang on just a second? Chief Duke, did you want to follow up on this conversation first? Sure. Thank you. You're next.
I just automatically assumed in the positions you are that everybody understands about certifications for the firefighter, the EMT particularly. That is governed by the Board of EMS, and it must be, the instruction is given at usually a junior college or a satellite from a junior college. It has to fall under a higher education facility. It used to be taught at a lot of fire departments had instructor coordinators, and the higher education facilities, that was taken away from them. So that's why the junior colleges are now have oversight on that and who teaches it. And the classes are a semester and a half. Our academy right now just deals with fire suppression capabilities, learn our protocols and everything, and taking the firefighter 1, firefighter 2 testing. So that is a hindrance to us too, but on our recruiting aspect of it, all the schools in the state of Kansas, in fact in the 4 state area, we hit Iowa and Nebraska, we send out to those institutions that we are hiring. They have websites that the students can go to and see who in a 4-state area is hiring, and we operate that way. All the schools in Kansas, Hutchinson, Johnson County, KCK, whatever school is given the EMT certification or paramedic, we send them the information that we are now hiring to try to coordinate it with when these individuals graduate, and that better serves us.
So is it our own requirement that they have to have the EMT in order to apply?
Yes, because we don't teach it. Before, like I said, back in up to the late 80s, I think it was, it's maybe mid 80s, that's when the Board of EMS came about, and when that educational aspect of it was put under the umbrellas of the higher education.
I mean, I know, for instance, that we're through I'm not sure anybody's doing it quite yet, but through the East Topeka Learning Center, we're planning to add CDL so that there's, we're trying collectively as a community to invest in those opportunities that look like there's a hole to bring local people along. But the EMS or EMT is not something that, for a variety of reasons, you would include after someone hires on.
Unless we're going to pay for it. That is an expense. We would have to bring in instructors from outside. Washburn Tech teaches the EMT.
Okay.
Right now, so, and if I'm not mistaken, it's between $1,200 and $1,800 for someone to go through the semester and a half for all the hours that they need, and also for their books, and then the practicals. There's a practical set exam given by the state of Kansas or VMS. We have no control over that at all. They are the ones who give the written and then the practical test.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. If I may follow up then with that. I mean, to me, I guess my first reaction there, and I know that's kind of beyond maybe the scope of what we're talking about residential requirements, but with all the training you guys do, that seems honestly a pretty insignificant amount of money, $1,800 to get somebody certified. Do you think that would move the needle to getting more qualified recruits if you didn't have to have that first, the EMS or the EMT?
It would extend our academy by, like I say, in a junior college setting, it's a semester and a half. We would have to bring in instructors outside. Who would fall under the umbrella of a higher education facility to come in specifically to teach. It would take at least 6 weeks the 12 weeks, depending if you're going to do it every day for 8 hours a day, and then for them to pass the test at the end of that, where they go to junior college, it's 3 hours. At the evening, 1 day a week, 2 days a week maybe.
Sure.
They get through it and they can concentrate. We hit them with so much in our 10-week academy that their brains boiling. If we throw that on them, that they have to pass this to maintain their employment, that could be really detrimental.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In addition to that, it's a requirement, and if we sent them through the EMT and they were not able to pass that, we would have then employed them for 2 to 3 months, depending on the amount of time that took, without having a qualified candidate at the end of it. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's really an important prerequisite for us with regards to this, because it is such a requirement. And then we're teaching the firefighter part of it the way we want it, the way we're doing it. And so I think that's the best point at this juncture. If at some point where we're having issues with recruitment and that becomes the factor, then we'll take a look at it. But I would not want to change that at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sasha.
I'm Sasha Hahn. I work for the Department of Neighborhood Relations. I'm not here representing any other opinions other than my own. So several of you know that I accepted the position with the city because I was looking to move to Topeka for personal reasons. I wanted to move up here and marry a guy. So, and I think that most people make decisions about where they live based on personal stuff. I guess that's a big point that I wanted to make to you. I do not live in the city limits. I live in the county because when I got here, I came with 2 horses. So that would have been a very challenging thing for me to find a place to live inside the city. Had that been a requirement, I would not have been able to accept the job. I wouldn't have gotten rid of my horses for the position.
Well, there's at least one place in East Topeka that always has horses.
Yes, District 4, come out, we have plenty.
Sure. So, just to kind of bring to a personal note, those personal choices that people make about where they live, number one. Number two, we recently had a very talented high-level staff member leave to take a position in another city, our finance director. She shared with me on the evening that we all got together to wish her good luck that had we not had the residency requirement, she would have considered staying. It wouldn't have been, unthinkable for her to consider staying. So think of that from a retention standpoint, I would point out to you. And 2 other quick points to make, and then I'm going to sit down.
Meaning, in her case, that she might have moved to Lawrence or closer to Kansas City and commuted.
The move was precipitated by her husband accepting a job in the Kansas City metro area, and she had to find a job there as well because she couldn't work here and live there. So, just a good example for you of a recent loss that we had to the organization. I'm sure that we'll do a good job filling that position, but that was a loss to your leadership in the organization. I think that when these residency requirements were established, I think it was a different time in our society. I think it was a more traditional time when we had one income in the household, you had a mom staying at home, and so to pick up and move your family for dad's job was just kind of the cultural norm if you had to do that. So things are different now. Now we have mostly dual income households because you have to in order to, support your family, and that often requires a commute for someone. So I think that those are important things for you guys to consider when you consider not only recruitment, which has been highlighted really well by the police and fire department, but retention as well. And finally, I would say to you, I know several of your senior staff that don't live in the city of Topeka. They live in the county, but they care very much about what they're doing, myself included. I'm passionate about my job, and I would challenge you guys to find people that care more about what they're doing. That is not created by your residency requirement. That's just who I am. And those are the people that we're looking for, and we can't instill that desire to be a public servant and to serve your community through a residency requirement. That's all I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's a pretty good way to wrap up this first round, unless somebody else wants some time to share some comments. We got a new face? Krista?
The second starts with 5?
5:30.
Oh, okay.
So you can go to the restroom. Get a break, just saying. Anybody else? Anybody from staff? Jackie?
I was asked on behalf of Teamsters, Mike Scribner, their business rep, could not be here today, but he just asked if I would convey to the committee that Teamsters is very supportive of the removal of the residency requirement for many of the same reasons that have been talked about here today, but certainly the challenge of recruitment has hit our street maintenance division, which they represent, and the smaller communities, we have had applicants from those communities outside of Shawnee County, and he feels that it is a hindrance to getting qualified applicants, and he asked that I convey that today.
Thank you, and thank him for sending the word. Anybody else? Follow up, repeat, new? Going once? Going twice? Thank you so much. If we have, given that we have gone this far, I would suggest that we hold discussion until after our second hearing, if that's all right with you. And with that, then we will close this meeting. Oh.
Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt. So the second hearing is the same thing that we did here today?
It was intended to be after 5 for people who couldn't come from 3 to 5.
So we don't need to stick around to say the same thing in the same?
Not at all, not at all. You are
account.
recorded on tape for posterity forever, and certainly we're all here, so no, you don't need to stay through unless you want to. And certainly if you're aware of somebody that was on the fence about whether they were going to come and had something to say,
But your discussion.
We'll be picking up where we left off at 5:30.
Your discussion and any action taken will be done at the end of that public comment section.
We are actually, the way our agenda is set up in our anticipation, I think ours says discussion and possible action, but we really had some homework to do beforehand, wanted to hear the input, have an opportunity for some discussion after that second hearing today, and then are expecting to actually convene to make a decision and recommendation to make a decision on what we think in January. And therefore, either if we decide that nothing would happen, that we have duly discussed it and don't have a recommendation to anybody, it's over as far as the committee is gone. If we decide to make a recommendation to the council, we will decide that, hopefully at that January meeting, at which point then it would advance to the council as a committee report. Any questions further about that? I'm glad you asked, because I didn't say it at the beginning, so who knew? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you again.
I joined to make a difference.
A difference in my community. A difference for the future generation.
Against the war on drugs.
Against crime.
I make a difference for honor.
For pride. For justice.
For those who have made the ultimate sacrifice.
I make a difference as a guardian.
As a guardian for the Topeka Police Department.
Do you have what it takes to make a difference?
Do you have what it takes to be a guardian?
Going to spend much time reviewing. Okay, it is 5:30 on December 19th, 2018. This is the City of Topeka's City Council Policy and Finance Committee meeting, and I will call that meeting to order and do that by asking my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Jeff Cohen, District 8.
Good evening, Tony Emerson, representing District 4.
And I'm Karen Hiller, the chair, and I'm representing District 1. staff that's present. Would you go around?
Thank you. Brent Trout, City Manager.
Catherine Walter, Senior Assistant City Attorney.
Jackie Russell, Human Resources Director.
Liz, you're on the list since you're right there.
I am. Liz Toyne, City Council Assistant.
Thank you, and all the staff, city manager and the lead staff that are here have assisted us to prepare for this meeting. Our first order of business is to simply review our work from earlier this afternoon and prior. Right now here at 5:30 on the 19th, this is the second of a series of 2 public comment sessions that we as a committee set up for the issue of looking at our employee residency requirement. In the interest of time, I am not going to review all that we went over in the first meeting. That is on tape if you want to see the detail. We also have some handouts, and I will briefly mention what those are. The staff did a study of the residency requirements of 27 cities and counties. All but Kearney, Nebraska. They're all here in Kansas in terms of what requirements they have for the city manager or administrator, for department heads, for police and fire, and for other employees, just to get an idea of how our counterpart cities are looking. They're big and small cities, and we have some extra copies, I think, if anybody wants a copy to take along. We can also send it to you electronically if you'd like to see it or forward it that way. We have an article from the ICMA, the International City Managers Association, that is a review of prompted by a city of about 30,000 that was considering adding a residency requirement. And what it did was went back and forth about the pros and cons, as well as the input there in their community and best practices that the writer had researched, and some links through the ICMA, which is an excellent resource nationally. We also had an article from a city in Illinois, Springfield, Illinois, that in 2016 added a residency requirement. This is quite a journalistic view of they polled the citizens, and 69% wanted it. Kind of what happened afterward, and the back and forth about whether people really understood what they were voting for, what some of the pros and cons were, and what they got into. And then third, an article that's a little more than 10 years old, but was really great research in 2006 on the pros and cons, and then some examples of cities that approached the pro and con of a residency requirement at all, as well as some alternatives, such as, and I did a little summary that's available as well, but the alternatives included just having essential services employees have either a mileage or a time travel requirement. Having something like a residency preference, we would need to research it more, but maybe a bonus in a couple cents an hour of pay or whatever it was that would encourage people to live in the city. There was also some review of a residency hiring preference, where local residents got some preference in terms of that hiring process, as well as the earnings tax issue, whether if there were a local income tax that was charged either only to non-resident workers in a city, not just municipal ones, but anybody, or conversely, where there was a local income tax, but if you actually lived in the city limits, you were exempted from that or got a rebate. So we wanted to not just look at we give Councilman Cohen the credit for bringing this forward, based on, of course, the kinds of discussions that have gone back and forth for years and have continued. And so, we have some more information in this summary sheet from those articles. Maybe we'll end up referencing it while we talk today, but again, people are welcome to have that or look at the review of the conversation in our 3 o'clock session. We did have some good conferees, and we probably spent the first half hour reviewing pros and cons and different issues, and then had about an hour and a half of testimony and back and forth with the committee and with the staff that went very well. So that is available to you. what we'd like to do is just go ahead in this 5:30 hearing, if it's okay. We had one research item that Jackie Russell from HR has an answer for us already, and then go right into public comment from any who are here who would like to speak. Jackie, first.
Thank you. So the earlier question was I had reported that there were 83 applicants that had withdrew due to not wanting to relocate to Shawnee County in the time period of 2014 to 2018. And the follow-up question was, what was the total number of applications in that time period? And it was 17,961.
Wow.
Okay.
So we had a gentleman in the audience that was able to run the math in his head about 8,000 and said it was more like 2%.
Then,
I
yeah.
think he left.
Well, now it's about right, it'd be half of that now, or less.
It'd be like 0.5%, I'll bet ya.
Yeah, hold on a second. Calculator.
Do your magic.
What are the number, 83 divided by 17,000?
17,961. Or 18,000
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, it's about, you're right, it is about 0.5%. It's 0.46%, so less than, yeah, 1/2%, less than 1/2%.
And these, if you would review for us and the viewers now, that was people who entered the application process, if you could review that.
Yes, so these were entries into our application process where they started or completed an application, but noted on the application that they were not willing to relocate to Shawnee County.
Okay.
And there were 83 of those in the time period of 2014 to 2018. And that was out of a total number of applicants of 17,961.
So if we were going to divide in simple terms that maybe some of us can wrap around a little more, you pointed out that was roughly 20 a year, and it would be 20 a year out of about 4,500
Right.
applications a year on average, so pretty minor. We did have some anecdotal testimony of people who knew of people who just didn't apply at all because they were aware of that, and that's a little harder to track, of course, but some anecdotal conversation about that. Are there any other additions, questions, clarifications from our first session? If not, I would invite people to come and comment. I'm only seeing one new face in the audience, and so, or two, okay.
Some of you guys know I'm Justin Long. I work here at the police department, have for 9 years. What some of you guys might not know is I actually grew up in Lawrence, not too far from here. Came to Washburn, got recruited to come here to the police department. I say that to fill you guys in that I kind of have a wide spectrum of knowledge as far as other communities' opinions of Topeka, students' opinions on Topeka, and wanting to work here, live here, kind of what they want to do. And I can tell you firsthand that I actually got a lot of criticism for coming to Topeka from Lawrence and working here because of having to move away from family and friends and going ahead and doing it. And I still get reminded very frequently, going back, that I could just get hired at the Lawrence Police Department, move back home, be closer to family. And that option is available. And it does honestly cross my mind pretty often to do that. With that though, moving forward, as far as recruiting goes, I can tell you for a fact, going to Washburn, there are a lot of people that do want to move back home to their small towns, Sabetha, Hiawatha, wherever, where they grew up, and they don't want to work at the police department here because they'd have to stay in Shawnee County. I can tell you that from being a student, going along to schools with them, and now I'm on the recruiting team here, and in trying to convince the people to come, that is definitely something that they might not put down on their application, but it prevents them from wanting to even fill out an application when they can go to Lawrence and have no residency requirement. I just think it's stuff that all needs to be taken into account. Obviously, I'm here, I still live here. I enjoy the community. But I will say, you know, parents get older. When they need medical care, do I need to move back to Lawrence closer to be able to assist in all the means necessary to take care of them and what they need? Or will I be forced to find job placement elsewhere at that point in time to where I can actually take care of them? So just kind of on a personal level, you know, the thought process that I have on a regular basis, and I definitely think that removing the residency requirement would help current employees and future employees all in the same. So.
Thank you so much. We've got a question right here.
Absolutely.
Would you be bitter if the rule did change and you did it the right way the first time around?
What do you mean?
Would you be bitter if the residency requirement was lifted here and you had to move?
You had moved.
You had to move for your
Affirmatively
job.
before.
I guess I'm still not tracking exactly. You're saying like, had it not been here and now it is, or got put in place, or you're saying that now it got lifted?
If we do lift this, are you going to be bitter because you had to move?
No, because to me, that opens the door to me to where, like I said, if my parents get older and they need the care, I would be able to move closer to Lawrence, or you know what I mean? I'd be able to move closer to where commuting to take them to doctor's appointments, stuff like that, it'd be viable and I'd be able to do so.
Obviously, what's behind a lot of the reason cities and citizens want something like a residency requirement is they want people, and these are some of the things we went over at the beginning of the last one, but they want people to live in their community, they want to pay taxes in their community, they want them to know that community because they think they'll be able to do a better job if they're there all the time. Could you react to that a little bit and also tell us whether if it hadn't been there, whether with the option out there, you might have lived in Topeka anyway?
It is very possible. Like I said, I was only 21 when I got hired. This department has really like raised me and molded me into who I am. It's very possible I would have stayed here because I did have college friends, kids still, you know, at that time, kids that were still going to college that I was friends with. So it is very possible that I would have still been in Topeka up to this point. But just having the option that if I would have chose to move somewhere else, I could still come here and still take care of this community and do the best job that I possibly can, whether I live here or not. I think that's pretty irrelevant. When you show up to do your job, you show up to do the best job you can no matter what every day. So to me, it's not going to affect my work, whether I live here or I don't live here, whether or not I come every day to work as hard as I possibly can and do the best job that I can at my profession.
That's really helpful. Did you say you're helping with recruiting these days?
Yes.
So, you know, one of the, again, with the thought that citizens and our predecessors have had, they're concerned that somebody might not live here if they didn't have to or something. Do you think, as you know, the police department is working hard on recruiting, so is fire.
Absolutely.
So are a lot of the departments. And so if recruiting at that college graduation time is a logical time to be looking for folks in your department especially, without that requirement, what's your assessment? Any answer is okay. What's your assessment of how many people would go ahead and choose to live here anyway?
I can't put an actual number on how many would choose to live here, how many would stay. I mean, that's going to be based on their families, you know, where they're currently living, how stable they are, or a spouse, like Sasha stated earlier, to actually say how many would actually come to Shawnee County or to the city to actually live.
I mean, you're out there recruiting, so you've got a better idea than we do who's out there.
Yeah, I think it's just great to leave it open as an option to say, hey, come here, great community, great things to do with your kids, everything like that, like we're working on with everything downtown and Noto and everything else. But I also think that it's great to leave it open as an option to say, hey, look, you're not required to move here. Hey, maybe they come work here, maybe eventually they do move their family here, but had it been a strict policy that you have to move within 18 months, no, I'm not even going to take the leap of faith and try it. So we could even be hindering ourselves there, and people that would possibly take the leap of faith get hired on and then decide they like the community and would move here in the future and bring their families and their kids to the schools and everything. And now we're just never even getting them to the door.
Please.
Mr. Long, thank you for being here today and talking to us on this. So you've been 9 years on the police force, and please don't tell me where you live or anything. I don't want to put you or your family in any kind of...
you're fine.
But you live here in the county now, and that was...
In the city, right?
Yeah, I live in the city.
Okay. And do you own a house here now?
Yes, sir.
And stuff? Okay. I mean...
Well, the bank still owns it. You know.
Trust me, I know only 359 more payments, which is all mine. Yeah. Oh, yeah, trust me, yeah. Yeah, the bank can just soon I die, and then they get...
Right, exactly. Anyway. Just get it back.
And feel free to respond to this. I mean, frankly, when I see you, you're a successor of our policy. You know, this is exactly what we want. We want people moving here in our town, becoming a part of the community, and, you know, owning a house here, and that then creates so much economic activity, and you're a part of the community. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that's kind of tough. Your being here is kind of a testament to it's a good thing, right? You know, when we did it.
It is, unless, like I said, it ends up forcing me out so that I can be closer to my family to be able to take care of them when they get older.
Right. Now, if you don't mind, and this is kind of a little bit outside the thing, but one of the things we're working on, I think you're doing some with Momentum 2022, aren't you? Are you one of the, okay, I'm sorry.
No.
But one of the things we've been told is getting people like your age to move here. Once you move here and have a house and have a family, particularly once you have kids and they're involved in school, that kind of cements you in a place where it's hard then to move, or makes it less likely you will relocate. Have you found that to be true? I mean, is that your case right now?
That it's hard for me to move?
Yeah, I mean, would you be reluctant to move at this point because of...
Because of any of that? No.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
You might need to speculate on this a little bit, but those of us that have been around for a while and working on recruiting to the city have been aware of a couple of our big major employers who didn't have residency requirements, but also whose HR departments told the realtors to show them out in the county, and whose CEOs would prefer to live in Lawrence or Kansas City because they just, and people ended up just turning away from Topeka. You would meet the employees who lived here anyway, if you will, but the company was not oriented toward people living here at all. You described a little bit what some of the recruiting might be. If we lifted the requirement, would you expect that the department would still be really encouraging people to live inside the city, or instead kind of selling it differently?
So personally, I know obviously I'm on the response team too, obviously take-home cars, stuff like that. You know, that's also stuff to take into account. Right. So obviously when you're recruiting, a lot of these people want to do the cool stuff that's on TV, you know what I mean? They want to have a canine, they want to be on the response team, they want to, you know, that's what they know, because, you know, if we say, hey, you're going to show up and take a bunch of domestic reports and be doing paperwork for 8 hours out of your day, you know, who's going to show up? Let's be honest, you know?
Okay.
So if that's the case, there's still avenues where these people are still going to need to move to the county.
Could be close, yeah.
To be close for those specific units in which they're interested in and being in. So there's still going to be an encouragement factor for people who are motivated to move to the county and to move in. You're also going to have just the fact that, hey, if it's your day off and you want to go to court, are you going to want to drive an hour to go to court on your day off and then have to drive an hour back home? People aren't really going to want to do that. So you're not going to see a huge distance gap as far as how far people are moving, and there's still obviously going to be the encouragement to live in the county just off of convenience. The convenience factor of being close, because nobody wants to drive that far to and from work.
I realize you cannot speak for your union, at least I don't think you can, but if you have in your contract, and we have in the ordinance right now, a response time requirement for police officers, 30 minutes, right? I think we have a 30-minute response time in our policy now.
Yes.
So would you expect that it would be wise for us to just leave that
I think that'd be a good, I mean, that would be a starting point at least.
Okay.
Obviously not, speaking just for myself, not as a part of the union or anything.
Understood. Because, I mean, we have you know, police officers, we have firefighters, we have, people like for the water department that we've got a response time we have to hit in terms of the protocol if there's a water main break or something like that, how quickly we have to respond. So obviously somebody's got to be able to get in that truck and get over there.
Yeah.
So those have been specific so far, so maybe leaving those could be okay or necessary. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody
Other
else have any
questions? Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. A return. Okay.
This is more, I think, just a question for Ms. Russell.
Okay.
The numbers that you talked about, the applicants that said that they would, that removed their application, is that, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So those were people that actually filled out applications and said that they would not move here because of the residency requirement?
They either started to fill out an application or completed it, but in that process indicated they were not willing to relocate to Shawnee County.
Okay, so we have no way to quantify the number of people who never filled out an application because of the
Only based on you guys.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Chief? Get to the mic so you'll be immortalized on film.
Yeah, well, I know that we've talked about a lot of things, but Officer Long pointed out some very important issues, especially when we talk about the law enforcement side of things. If you have a take-home car because of your assignment, you're going to have to live inside the county. And so those officers will have to make that choice, you know.
Which duty they want to get to pull.
As he said, if you want to do the cool stuff, then you're going to have to live inside the county because of the response team, and you can't take a car outside of the county, you know. Yeah, you can't live out, take it outside to live, you know what I'm saying? So he raises a very valid point. But you also raise a very valid point that when you're talking about operational structure in mandated response, like the water department, street department, so on and so forth, you can still make the stipulation that you have to have that response time. And so however you meet that response time is up to you. I mean, if you know, say you want to, we could let them live an hour away. Response time's 30 minutes. Well, if they want to get a hotel and stay here, you know, so the response
When the weather's bad or whatever.
Yeah, that's up on them. It still does not alleviate the responsibility for operational mandates in which all of our city departments have to have. And so I think that's an important issue because a lot of our individuals, I know in the police department, because we have a lot of units that have take-home cars because of the duties that they do and requirements to come back, those mandates, time responses do not change. And so they have to make a decision.
You're probably going to ask the same question, so go first.
Yeah, thanks, Chief, for that. I got to say, this kind of raises more concerns to me because as Councilwoman Hiller talked about earlier, you know, there's this thing where the people who live close are going to have to, you know, do a disproportionate amount of the work, if you will. And I don't, like in my company, we have some guys who live down in Osage County, and it's always kind of a little bit of well, frankly, some people are kind of get angry because we do snow removal, and you know, these guys have four-wheel drives and stuff, but yet we get a big snow and they can't come in and help. You know, all of the rest of us are out at 1 a.m. and they get to sleep in because they, and so this is a problem that I see in my own company. And what I don't quite understand then is you would have like two classes of employees now. Only the employees that live in the county are eligible to do these jobs. And I'm just thinking what a management nightmare as you have, suddenly you only have this pool that can do all these, which not only maybe the glamorous jobs, but also the important jobs.
Yep.
And how would that be?
For us, I can tell you at the police department, it wouldn't be an issue. Because as Officer Long knows, the minute he says, I'm done with the response team, I have a whole line of young guys and gals that are going to take that job. And so we don't have that issue.
But if they live outside the county, you can't consider them until they want to move, right?
Well, that'll be up to them. I mean.
That was his point.
Yeah, that's my
It'll
point.
be a
Suddenly you
but
limit your pool, who you can.
I think Officer Long also made a very, very valid point in the aspect that most people are not going to live a long distance away. I feel that in my heart, that because I can tell you, when I was going to a 4-month-long school in Kansas City, Missouri, and I was driving back and forth every day for the Topeka Police Department, I cussed it every single morning I drove and every time I drove back. So I don't believe wholeheartedly that a big majority of individuals, I just think it's initially, you know, as Officer Long said, it reduces one more barrier, but I think in the big scheme of things, when we talk about those individuals that are really looking at being a little bit further out, I think for the most part, those are probably our more senior personnel that are looking towards the retirement end of things and saying, okay, I can move out here, I'm going to do my last 5 years, whatever it is, to retirement. I think our young personnel, I know especially on the police department and fire department side of things, I think the younger personnel, for the most part, will move relatively close to the city, if not into the city. I've lived in the city my entire life. You know, when I got hired, you had to live in the city limits. So it's just something I've always done. I mean, it's just, that's the way as Justice said, the department's kind of raised him, and that's kind of the way I was. I mean, I've really worked no place else, you know, military and graduated college, and here I am, you know, so.
And so the dilemma for us is, was that a good thing? Do we keep digging, you know, that deep dive and setting that standard, or do we loosen it up?
I think the thing to consider really is what is the purpose of a residency? What are we really trying to accomplish? And when we talk about, well, you're raised here, you're more invested here, you'll spend your tax dollars here and all that. But I know if you really look at it broadly, we have a whole lot of companies that the city of Topeka does business with that are not in Topeka and Shawnee County. And that's a whole lot of tax dollars going someplace else. And so when you look at it, what are we truly trying to accomplish with a residency? And when you look at, you know, some of these private sector positions, hospitals, I guarantee you the doctors that work at Stormont Vale and St. Francis, probably not very many of them live in Topeka or Shawnee County. They live over east.
Chief of Staff, Stormont, downtown, Loft. Just saying.
But when you talk about the doctors, you know,
St. Francis is also over Potwin.
So, yeah. But I'm just saying, you know, when you realistically, and really, to me, it breaks my heart that we have realtors that would encourage employees of businesses not to live here. And so that's a totally different issue than a residency issue. That's really, we need to build Topeka to be Topeka, the place that you want to come live, work, and play.
Well, some of that happened with those companies because of their management, and that's why I asked the question I did about recruiting, because that's there. And so to sort of give away the store, if you will, rather than have our, you know, to be assured that our recruiters would not only continue searching for, you know, affirmatively seeking minorities and women, because that's another priority of our city, but also would be affirmatively encouraging people to live in the city, which is a priority for all of us.
Sure.
And yet, you know, there are patterns in police and fire in particular where you move out as far out as you can. Not everybody.
Well, I think
you know,
that
not
trend,
wanting that to happen.
I think that trend for police and fire is pretty simple in the aspect of when you talk about the job that police and fire do on a day in and day out basis. And I'll relate this to a school teacher that I know that teaches at St. Matthew Elementary, which is a Catholic school.
District 4.
Okay? Exactly. And that's where we go. But he says, I don't go to Mass at St. Matthew. I go to another Catholic parish to go to Mass, because when Mass is over, I don't want to have to deal with parents coming up to me all the time and talking about their kids and talking about school. I want to go to Mass to go to Mass.
Welcome to being an elected official.
Exactly. And so when you talk about the job that our guys and gals do on a day in and day out basis, I think that's part of it. I think it's how do I get away from, how do I get a break, and sending your kids to school. We chose to send ours to parochial school, and that was really kind to shelter them a little bit as they're growing up. Now, when they went to Hayden, I can tell you they were open to a lot of different opinions and stuff about law enforcement. And I have one that's diehard kid that wants to be a police officer. And she's doing everything possible she can, and she defends it 100% at Washburn University as well as she did at Hayden. But when they get a little bit older, they can do that. And I think when we talk about raising our kids, that's what a lot of people look at. Okay, how can I shelter them a little bit away from some of the things? And so when you talk about moving out to the county, that's what, I think that has a lot to do with it. I think it's just really getting that break factor. And I worked deep undercover narcotics my first year, and we would be out at the mall 5-10 years later, and I had people coming up to me, hey, remember me? You arrested me. I went to prison. And so I think it's just part of those things that, because of what we do on a day in and day out basis. And I don't think, outside of that, I think most people would live inside the city limits. But I think it's really just that kind of thing. And so when we talk about young people want to be around what's going on, right? And if you live in Osage County as a 21-year-old, you're not going to get the same experiences that you do living in the city of Topeka. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, I have to believe, because we focus our recruiting on younger people, right? And a lot of our younger people now, they are single. And so I think that for the most part, they will still live in the county, if not the city, because there's not that many apartments in the county. And so when you come here at 21, 22, 23, and you're single, you're probably going to be in an apartment,
So help us with the other side of that. We talked about this a little bit before, but we represent people who crave having you guys here. You want to make sure that the law enforcement officers understand the community. They know what it's like at that grocery store in the neighborhood, or whether Joey's really such a bad guy after all, because they know him on the street.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Well, again, I think it's what are we trying to accomplish, with a residency. I think that's the heart of it. What are we trying to accomplish? And if we can't say what the real motivation is.
Well, I think that's it. And so, and it's a conversation here, but it's the answer that we would have for citizens if they feel like, if we were to recommend the change and they feel like we're giving away something really important.
I say this with caution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I know a lot of individuals that say they represent certain segments of our community and certain parts of our town.
Mm-hmm.
But yet they don't live in those parts of town. They live where they choose to live because they want the best for their family.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say that with caution because I know a lot of individuals because of my job and what I've done in dealing with the community. And so when you say police officers have to live in the city limits because that's who's paying them, those are the same people that are choosing to say, I represent this segment of our community and this part of our city, but I don't choose to live there because I want my kids to have something better. So we live somewhere else. And again, I say that with caution because, that's getting into a little different dive. But again, I think when we put it out there as businesses, we send a whole lot of taxpayers' money. And you guys just approved the half-cent sales tax once again for road improvements.
No, you guys.
Actually, the citizens.
Well, you're right, but you approved to take it to the citizens, right?
Right.
Correct.
That's right. You as a governing body approved to say, I'm going to take this to the citizens of Topeka, and we voted on it. But those are a whole lot of tax dollars that are going to companies that are not based in Topeka. And so when you use that as a defense, that you get paid by the city of Topeka, you need to spend your money here because it's coming from tax dollars. We send more with one contract probably out than we do all the city employees lumped together.
Yeah, if we do
And I know,
that,
again, that's another conversation.
you know, again, back to the question I asked Officer Long, you know, to make sure that we are at least genuinely selling. You know, when we do those street contracts, it is a priority to the people who voted for it, and they tell us that. They want us to hire local if we can,
Yep.
local engineers, local contractors, and so on. And we've worked on that, because if we have too much work for our local folks to do, or we need to hold their feet to the fire to do a good job,
Yeah.
or we're going to hire somebody else, then, but we do prioritize that.
And I appreciate, council members, when you asked, you know, Officer Long if he was on one of the Momentum 2022 committees. That's where, when I came on as the chief, I presented a thing to the city manager that talked about how I'm going to get the Topeka Police Department involved in the city of Topeka. We have 22 employees from the Topeka Police Department on Momentum 2022 committees. We have officers that are on different boards and committees and directorships throughout the city of Topeka, and that is us investing in the city of Topeka. So when we go out and recruit, we sell the city of Topeka. We don't sell Shawnee County, we sell the city of Topeka. And what we got going on downtown is a huge selling point. What we got going on at 29th and Fairlawn is a huge selling point. Those are the things, when we talk about recruiting people to come live in the city of Topeka, not just the police department. Again, we're talking about all the city employees, just not even city employees, but bringing people into the city of Topeka. Those are the things that we got to sell. And that's where we have to be all on board. And by saying all on board, I'm talking about city government, I'm talking about the citizens of Topeka, I'm talking about our media partners. This is a group effort. And so, again, when we talk about recruiting, why do we want a residency? And if it's just a stumbling point that at the end of the day isn't really going to, I think, make a huge difference on where people live, but it's just that one stumbling block. A lot of those people, when they fill that out, okay, when they initially, like Justin said, we don't even give them the opportunity to come here and work for the city of Topeka, because we have that. But you get hired by the city of Topeka, you see all the good things going on, you see what we have downtown, you see what we have in Noto, you see what you have in 29th and Fairlawn, you see all those great projects, and then you start going, man, why am I living over in Kansas City and putting up with all that BS when I can live here? I know people that have moved from the east side of Topeka, 29th and California area, 29th and Croco area, over to the west side because there's no shopping, there's nothing to do on the east side. And so they moved to the west side, where there's shopping, restaurants, and all that. So we as Topeka have to do a little bit better job in selling Topeka and recruiting people.
Okay.
Yes.
I think the other thing, Chief, I think that you would say is that as you do your training through the academy and ongoing training, you teach the officers how to become invested within the neighborhoods that they're patrolling so that they know how to interact with the community, and not even just the CPOs, the community police officers, it's all officers and the way they find that. So it's ingrained in them that they get to know the neighborhood and the town that they're working in.
If I may. Chief Cochran, if I can just answer, at least for me, I kind of think of three reasons. One is that people who live in a community have a greater stake in the success of a community, and they worry about things about like tax rates and stuff, which, frankly, when you ask for a raise and know it's going to raise your taxes as well, that might temper some of that. It might temper some of the things. Also, the people who live in a community, they get to experience the policies and procedures and how they affect a normal citizen. I'm trying to think of somebody I can pick on in a department, but for instance, if someone who works over in, I'll just say development services, if they had to apply for a building permit and build a building here in Topeka, they would probably change how some of their procedures. Just because it's not anything like a malevolent, it's just that they don't realize how some of the things they enact, how they affect someone who lives there and has to operate there. But kind of the third thing for me is that population, and this is something that just came out this week, population of a city drives so much of the economic health and, vitality of a community. And, with more population, you get more retail, you get a larger tax base. So to me, it has nothing to do with, hey, we pay your salary, by God, you have to live here. That's not it at all. It's just for those reasons. And I'll tell you just a quick story from my personal experience. My brother has a really nice retail store in Lawrence he owns. And he got successful, so after about 10 years of doing it, he built a house out in Big Springs. And it was exactly what he wanted. He designed it, had a big outbuilding that he could do all his stuff in. And then about 18 months, he realized, oh my gosh, I'm losing. He no longer felt like he was connected to the people in the community, his customers and stuff. He sold his house at a huge loss and moved back a block from where he originally started in Lawrence. And that to me really informed that it really matters, when you're plugged into a community, it's different than if you just work there and come back and, spend your, so I just wanted to clarify that, at least for me.
And I'm glad you did, because I'm up here as a department head trying to help my fellow department heads and be able to recruit the best quality candidates that we can find. I have lived in the city of Topeka my whole life, and I kind of have that same feeling. I feel that has been a very big benefit for me as the chief of police because of those partnerships and connections that I've made. And I know the city of Topeka. And so I do appreciate that. And you make a very valid point on the process. I feel sorry for small business owners in the aspect of how we get things done. But the city manager presented a presentation last night on rapid improvement processes. Right. And those are things that we talked about. And so I am very confident that we're going to break that barrier down. I feel very confident because of this process. We're going to identify those things. Right. It should take, when we talk about things, it shouldn't take 6 months to get a permit. It just shouldn't.
And that was just a hypothetical example, by the way.
But I can sympathize with that because I have some projects that were delayed, and those were internally. And so when we talk about how we do internal business, then what are we doing to the public? Right. So I'm very confident with what the city manager has done with that process and sending department heads to the training that those things are going to improve. And and what was the last one?
Oh, just that the population of a city drives so much of its economic.
And I think you're right. I agree totally with that. And that's when I was talking about we need to take a holistic approach, the city of Topeka, and not when we talk about bringing people into Topeka and these firms that recruit people and all that other stuff. Topeka is a great place to live. Absolutely. I'm going to tell you that right now. And I'm extremely proud to be the chief of Topeka. So we have a great place. We got to sell it. We got to do a better job of selling it. And we're not just talking about recruiting for the police department or the city of Topeka or any other department within the city of Topeka. We're talking about everything. There are great things going on in Topeka, Shawnee County. We got to sell it. We got to come up, and I think that's where Momentum 2022 is going. I think the plaza going in, and we're starting to see some progress. That's going to pique a whole lot of interest. And, I know, Councilman Hill, you said at City Council last night, you have people saying, well, why we invested in the riverfront property when we ought to be doing this or that? Well, what I'm going to tell you is we talk about taxpayers. The taxpayers that are paying taxes want stuff. And the stuff they want is stuff like going on at 29th and Fairlawn, the plaza going in down there, the riverfront. And those are the people that are paying the taxes. And so when you start giving those people those type of things, we're going to bring people into the city of Topeka. When that plaza opens up, when 29th and Fairlawn opens up, people are going to want to come to the city of Topeka because we'll have a whole lot to offer. And when we talk about, there's really nothing, there's no reason Manhattan should be drawing more people to events than the city of Topeka. Okay? That shouldn't be happening. When we get this stuff in place, we're going to have people coming to the city of Topeka because there'll be nothing west of us to have those draws. And so we just, part of it is we got to hang in there. We got to work together. We got to be a team. And if a simple thing is a residency, is a hanging up point for some of these great young people to come to the city of Topeka, then, you know, maybe we need to look at it. But I'm very confident, you know, Officer Long, just like he said, you know, I came here, went to school here, this is where I got hired, so, hey, I lived here. You know, he'll have to make that decision in another 10, 15 years when your parents start getting older. But I can also tell you this, Lawrence isn't that far away, Justin. You can hop on the highway and drive over there.
Exactly.
So, you know, and I'm very confident that he's probably not going to move to Lawrence, you know, for that temporary situation. But, you know, again, if the residency is the one small thing hanging up some of these great things for potential high-end quality people, then we're not helping the city of Topeka as a whole, not just city employees, but the city of Topeka.
It's a good thing he's chief because he's got spare time and we can send him out on the street, right, to sell Topeka?
That's right.
Awesome.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Okay, no, got a different department here, so he's just soaking it up. We'll take it back tomorrow, I guess. All right. If people have comments later, you're welcome to send them to me at khiller@topeka.org, or if people in your departments have more, it's easy to find all three of us if you want to send it to our committee. Jeff Cohen, C-O-E-N, Jay Cohen, and T. Emerson. We're happy to have them. We will share them amongst the committee and with the staff that's been supporting us as appropriate, but we want to hear both sides and be very thorough. And again, if there are articles or some material that we could read that would be enlightening toward doing a good consideration of this issue, we'll take links, we'll take copies, whatever it is, so that we can do that as well. With that, are there any other comments to share, questions, comments, issues to put on the floor? If not, then we left ourselves an option for discussion this evening, but we've been here for almost 3.5 hours. That's a lot of time to talk and think. Shall we call it a day and set a meeting for January to reconvene and discuss and go forward?
Good.
All right. If we can get calendars, I prefer to walk out of a meeting with a date rather than make Liz chase us all down.
Oh, a date, like a meeting date.
Well, both. You know, what am I saying?
That was a joke. Sorry.
City manager's going to Elf. Anyone who wants to go, he's leaving at 7. It's going to be really fun. Already been? All right. Okay, January. What looks good to people? Because we could start pretty early. Sure. Our goal, by the way, we are keenly aware of the fact that when the first of the year turns over, it's time for new council committees and things like that. And so the new committees don't get appointed till the 1st of February. So we're looking at finishing this up in January so that we can either decide that it was interesting to talk about, but we have no recommendation. This issue was generated from within the committee, so we have no obligation to anybody else to report out. But we will make that decision at that meeting in January, and if we have a report out, we will hopefully in one meeting. If not, we'll figure it out and make our recommendation and send it forward to the council if we have one.
Madam Chair, how long a meeting do you think this would be? This is just going to be internal discussion between us, is that?
It would be discussion between us. We will certainly always have the option for conferees. What I am thinking is that if any or all of us that are considering moving this forward, we got down in the weeds a little bit about whether we would leave a 30-minute or 30-mile response in there. Even if we loosened it up in general, we might need some counsel from HR and legal, whether having that in city manager as to whether if there are response time for certain employees, whether that's already covered by labor contracts and doesn't have to be in a city ordinance, or whether it should be, and we haven't gone into that territory yet. So a little thought on your part would probably help us through that a little bit faster. Again, if anybody on the committee, I really encourage you, when we had our first meeting, we had copies of what our city ordinance is as well. I'm sure Liz or other staff could refresh. But to look at that and think about what you would recommend. And if there are any complications with that, to let Liz or me know, and so that we can research it prior to the meeting. Even to the point of, because of coma, since we're a committee of 3, we can't talk to each other about this outside the meeting, which is kind of a pain. We can state opinions, but not negotiate anything. So if you wanted assistance in developing even a draft to propose, if you have one, that would be helpful, so that we can move it along. Okay, calendars.
7th
Wednesday, this.
Like the 16th or something. I may be out the 10th and 11th. I don't know about the 9th.
All right, well, the 16th looks,
Yeah, I'm open the 16th. I'm also open the 7th or 8th.
the 16th is very good for me, right?
16th.
I think.
Works good for me.
16th?
And would you think just an afternoon meeting for that one? Not necessarily the hybrid where we went after 5?
No?
The 16th, typically our governing body agenda reviews are at 3 o'clock.
Oh, so.
So that would pull me and Jackie and Chief is here.
Well, what about 1 o'clock
It
or
starts
10
at
o'clock
3,
or?
So, yeah, I mean, if you did a different time.
Anytime is fine.
3.
Anytime during the day?
Yeah, that whole day I'm open.
There's a
right
whole
now.
bunch of annual meetings. I keep being afraid that I don't have something on my evening calendar that's supposed to be on there.
4 o'clock would be, if you later in the evening or in the morning, it's fine after.
Which would you prefer? Because at this point, given now, and we don't have any press here, so if there is some publicity, we didn't have any citizens coming off the street that worked from 8 to 5 who would have had to take off, so I try and be sensitive to that. But if we're really looking pretty internally, then I'm fine with doing something during the day and accommodating somebody from the outside.
Now, would you have, we don't have a meeting that next, would you still have an agenda meeting that day? Because we don't have a meeting that next week.
Now that you mention that, we probably would not, because there'd be 3 weeks before the next meeting.
Yeah, Martin Luther King Day, I think, that's the reason we're not meeting on the 22nd, correct?
The 22nd is a
Oh, it's the
fourth.
3rd. It's the
We're
4th.
only
You're
meeting
right.
twice
You're
in
right.
January, on the
You're right.
8th and the 15th.
Yeah, so you're right, actually, the 16th, we would not have that meeting.
Okay.
16th at 3 o'clock?
Sure.
Just do that?
Sure.
Then you'll be right in your rhythm.
We would meet again on the 23rd.
We could use them
Is that
for
something
the
you
conference
could, you
rooms.
could send out as an invite to all?
Yeah, you could use first floor conference.
December 16th.
Okay.
January 16th.
That's you all's call in terms of the ease of getting it televised. So we'll let.
So 3 p.m. on the 16th?
3 p.m. on the 16th. Going?
Great.
Okay.
What? Well, we'll let Liz figure that out.
Yeah, sounds good.
They were saying we could probably meet.
We can do first floor conference room, and we'll let Liz figure out which works best.
It's a matter really of the televising business, I guess, the ease of that, and you all know
She'll
more than we
evaluate
do.
which room's best.
All right,
Chief's office will use his body cam.
there you go. All right, well, with that, again, easy to find emails for us. Let us know if you have or know anyone with written comments. Thank you all again for coming and participating in the prep work that everyone did for us. We are adjourned.
All right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.